Hey guys, tonight we begin in a land where the clouds know their place in society, right above the rooftops of the ancient Kingdom of Benin. You're not quite sure what you've stepped into at first. The sky grumbles. Red clay clings to your ankles like sticky socks. The air smells of rain-soaked wood and something faintly peppery, maybe grilled guinea fowl, maybe trouble. The mud beneath your feet is alive, almost musical. It squelches and splats with every step, in rhythm with the far-off drums echoing through the canopy. But tonight, the real star of the show is not a king or a warrior or even a god. No, it's rain. And you, lucky you, have arrived just in time to witness how something as simple as water falling from the sky once set off an entire chain of human rituals, taxes and social debates. The Kingdom of Benin, sitting in what's now southern Nigeria, was no sleepy village. This was a bustling, brilliant society with systems and ceremonies for just about everything. And yes, that included rain. A little drizzle wasn't just weather. It was an event, an opportunity, and sometimes a minor bureaucratic emergency. Here's your reality check. You probably wouldn't last a week here during the wet season. Between the ceremonial duties, slippery courtyards, and one very fussy tax clerk who once fined a man for collecting runoff in the wrong kind of bowl, you'd be lucky to stay dry, let alone debt-free. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in from somewhere rainy, or not, go ahead and post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a packed earth path lined with raffia palms, your footsteps muted by the spongy floor. The downpour is gentle for now, more a lazy drizzle than a proper storm, but already the landscape responds. Small frogs chirp. Leaves quiver under the weight of droplets. In this world, everything is connected to the rain, even you. Ahead, two boys balance giant woven baskets on their heads, casually sidestepping puddles that look like they might go ankle deep. They're laughing about something, probably your face, which is at this point soaked and completely unprepared. A nearby woman chuckles as she shields herself with a broad plantain leaf, which is both practical and far more stylish than your soggy tunic. As you step into the central city of Benin, an organised, elegant maze of earthen streets, thatched roofs and tall red walls, you begin to notice something odd. People don't seem annoyed by the rain. In fact, they treat it like a guest. Children giggle and play barefoot. A dignified elder nods toward the sky with something that looks suspiciously like respect. And merchants casually cover their wares with tightly woven mats, grumbling less about damage and more about dues. That's right. In Benin, the rain didn't just soak your clothes, it touched your wallet. The kingdom developed a system of taxing rainwater, especially the kind that landed on homes, market stalls and royal properties. Not the rain itself exactly, but its use, its presence, and its effects. If your roof caught enough to fill a pot, you might owe a little something. If your stall flooded and you bailed it out into the street, well, someone's going to want to know where that runoff went. Historians still argue whether this was an actual codified tax, like a flat fee enforced across neighbourhoods, or a more fluid, ritualised contribution system tied to season, status, and the occasional interpretive dance. What's clear, though, is that rain was never just background noise. It was a monitored, measured, and sometimes monetized part of life. You pass a row of compound gates, each one intricately carved with images of leopards, crocodiles, and a few very regal-looking tortoises. Rain snakes down the mud-plastered walls like silver veins. A child in one doorway balances a calabash bowl under the eaves of a thatched roof. She watches it fill with rainwater, not to drink, but to measure. Her mother will check it soon, probably to calculate how much they've collected, or maybe how much they owe. This practice, informal but deeply embedded, played into Benin's broader sense of order. Every aspect of life here, the way you dressed, traded, ate, or even bathed, fit into a beautifully choreographed system. So of course rain, that most unpredictable of guests, had to be accounted for. You keep walking, your soaked sandals making a polite squish with each step. Up ahead, the grand walls of the Oba's palace loom into view. The Oba, king, ruler, high priest, and sometimes reluctant meteorologist, lives here, surrounded by bronze plaques, roped coral, and a dizzying number of attendants. The rain tax, like all other forms of tribute, ultimately filters through this maze of influence. What surprises you, though, is how relaxed everyone seems about it. The tax isn't harsh, it's graceful. No one's yelling. No one's clutching a receipt and arguing about millimeters of rainfall. Instead, there's a kind of knowingness in the air, as though the community accepts this odd balance between nature and rule. Some pay with coins, others with yams. One clever man reportedly paid in jokes, though that loophole was swiftly closed after the court interpreter laughed too hard. The mud thickens again as you loop around the outer palace compound, where a line of tax clerks sits under wide raffia umbrellas. One of them eyes you with amusement, tapping a stick against his copper tablet. You're dripping, muddy, and radiating foreign confusion. But no matter, you're also now part of the scene, and like everyone else, a temporary subject of the rain. Beside the clerks, a woman fans herself with a palm leaf, her ledger full of tiny carvings, ticks, notches, and swirls. She's probably recording the names of those who filled their pots or directed runoff into storage barrels. Her partner, a man in a tunic the colour of tamarind bark, leans over to adjust a small carved statuette that looks suspiciously like a water spirit. Rain keeps falling. A group of children races by, shrieking with joy, their bare feet slapping the wet ground. One of them carries a basket shaped like a turtle shell. He slips, but instead of crying, he laughs, loud and full, as though the ground itself meant for him to slide. You pause there a moment longer, watching it all unfold. The Kingdom of Benin, where even something as wild as the weather finds its place in the grand design. It's not about control, really. It's about cooperation. If rain must fall, and fall it will, then why not honour its presence with a small gesture? A coin here, a yam there, a respectful nod to the clouds, and a handshake with the clerks below. It's a kind of poetry, a system that, at least for now, makes perfect sense. You're ushered through a narrow, arching gateway as the drizzle thickens into something steadier, though still strangely soft, like a whisper landing over the entire kingdom. The walls around you are redder now, streaked with water and time, and they hum faintly with stories you're not quite meant to hear. The scent of wet earth intensifies as you step into a courtyard framed by towering mud walls, each one carefully maintained with the same ritualistic attention you might give your grandmother's prized china cabinet. Here, just beyond the central palace, the artistry of Benin speaks for itself. Bronze plaques gleam with rain, their grooves filled with silvery drops that highlight every etched cheekbone, every ripple in a warrior's robe, every curiously accurate depiction of a leopard eating what may or may not be a mango. You'll never know for sure. The mango-like object remains a mystery scholars have debated for decades. Historians still argue whether these plaques were meant solely for royal display, religious purposes, or if they were in fact elaborate receipts for taxes paid. And not just any taxes, rain-related contributions have been linked, however loosely, to some of the iconography in these bronzes. The truth may be lost in the mist of centuries, but there's something cheekily bureaucratic about the way some plaques seem to show ledgers, scribes, and what looks suspiciously like a pot being passed around. A low whistle brings your attention back to the living world. An attendant nods at you. He's barefoot with bright eyes, and a grin that suggests he knows several things you don't. He gestures for you to sit on a bench beneath a slanted awning, just beside a carved wooden pillar shaped like a hornbill. Rain drips rhythmically from the edge, forming a small puddle in a stone bowl strategically placed below. Even here, someone is collecting water, perhaps for taxes, perhaps for brewing, perhaps for something a little more ceremonial. Across the courtyard, a group of men in ochre-coloured tunics are unloading sealed pots from a woven cart. One of them checks each pot's weight with exaggerated drama, bouncing it once in his palm before handing it off. "Too light," he declares for one, raising an eyebrow. "This family either drinks too fast or cheats too slow." The others laugh, but it's not cruel. It's ritual. The tax on rainwater, particularly on its storage and redirection, wasn't just enforced by edict. It was managed through community. Whisper networks and side eyes, public ceremonies and little gestures all worked together to keep the system balanced. And when disputes arose, well, that's when things got theatrical. You're invited to follow the men as they carry their pots down a polished, stone-bordered pathway, leading deeper into the palace precinct. Along the way, you pass a series of shrines tucked into alcoves, some tiny, marked with feathers and shells, others larger, decorated with bronze serpents or carvings of rainbirds mid-flight. The connection between spiritual life and water is unmistakable. In Benin, water wasn't just taxed, it was sacred, storied, full of personality, and so were the people who handled it. Inside one modest chamber, cool, dim, and pleasantly smoky from a slow-burning coil of herbs, you're introduced to a court scribe. He doesn't look like much, seated cross-legged on a reed mat, with a short stack of bark paper sheets and a goat hair brush poised in one hand. But this man is the living record of the kingdom's rainfall history. He nods to you once, then flicks a glance out the tiny window. 10 minutes heavier than yesterday, he says. You blink. Excuse me? The rain, he clarifies. It began at third beat of the midday drum and has lasted 4 palm lengths longer than the last one. Slightly sweeter scent too. That usually means higher frog activity tomorrow. You nod as though you understand. You don't. The scribe is part of a long-standing tradition. Palace-based scholars who didn't just record political events, but also natural phenomena with a kind of obsessive detail usually reserved for stamp collectors and competitive chess players. Rainfall was recorded not in inches or millimetres, but in anecdotes, sensations, animal behaviour, and the volume of public sniffling. Some entries from older scrolls refer to the day of the thunder that smelled like yams, or the 5th storm of the grandmother frog. Are they helpful in a statistical sense? No. Are they delightful? Absolutely. Back outside, you pass through a shaded arcade where a group of young apprentices are learning the art of bronze casting. Each has a tiny mould, some shaped like fish, others like stylized raindrops. You pause by one boy carefully etching lines into a wax figure. He looks up shyly. It's a rain collector, he explains. For the Ober's wall. You raise an eyebrow. The Ober's wall has rain collectors? He nods. They pour into the offering bowls, then the elders measure it and declare the frog tax. The frog tax? You don't even ask. Sometimes it's better to let the mysteries wash over you like rain on a banana leaf. As you make your way back into the main courtyard, a hush begins to fall. The drizzle fades to mist. People stop what they're doing. You follow their gaze to the palace gate, where a large ornate umbrella begins to emerge, carried by 2 attendants. Beneath it walks the Aoba, the Queen Mother. Her robes shimmer with copper-threaded fabric. Her necklaces are so heavy with coral beads they seem to anchor her to the earth itself. But her presence is light, floating just above the seriousness of ceremony. She carries herself with a subtle, amused confidence, like someone who could levy a tax or cancel it with a wink. And rumour has it she once did. According to the older palace workers, the Yoba of 3 generations ago once declared her household exempt from rain taxes for an entire season, claiming that her ancestors had struck a personal deal with the sky. Whether that was true or a very polite act of rebellion is still debated. Today's Queen Mother offers a brief smile to the gathered crowd. Her attendants lower the umbrella just so, ensuring she avoids even a single drop. Not for vanity, but for precedent. If her garments touch water, it changes how much her household owes, and no one wants to redo that math. You watch the processions dissolve back into everyday life. The rain has stopped. The bowls are full. The scribes are scribbling. The frogs, presumably, are planning their taxes. And you're starting to feel like you belong here. Wet, but wiser. Curious, but calm. The Kingdom of Benin is full of rules and rain, artistry and administration, and people who know how to carry water with grace, even if they sometimes carry it in turtle-shell baskets. The streets smell different after the rain, muddier, richer, like the earth is exhaling. You walk beneath a canopy of woven palm fronds stretched between timber poles, temporarily shading a row of market stalls that have just reopened after the drizzle. The vendors, still dabbing their foreheads with frayed cloths and muttering about prices being washed clean by the gods, seem unbothered. After all, rain is currency here, even when it falls sideways. The market of Benin hums with a low, buttery energy now that the clouds are fading. Chickens pick at stray kernels underfoot. A boy carries a gourd full of what smells suspiciously like fermented pineapple, trailing sugarcane peelings as he goes. And you're just trying to avoid slipping on a puddle that's mysteriously shaped like a lizard. But here in the market, this living, gossiping hive, you begin to understand how the tax on rainwater reached far beyond palace courtyards or scholarly scrolls. It trickled into everyday life, right down to the worn cobbles beneath your feet. Traders paid small levies on any goods stored or grown using collected rainwater. Yes, even if it was just yams kept slightly less mouldy in a basket under a leaky roof. Technically, the moisture made them taxable. This wasn't a world of harsh punishments or sneaky fines, though. The real genius of the system was its grace. Taxes here weren't extracted, they were performed. You watched as a spice vendor dropped a pinch of dried peppercorn into a communal bowl set up near the shrine to Olokun, the god of the sea. For the drizzle that kept my stock from shrivelling, he said simply. It's hard to argue with logic that poetic. Not all taxes were spices and smiles, of course. Historians still argue whether the market taxes on water-heavy goods were fixed or flexible. Some evidence suggests prices shifted based on perceived divine moods. On unlucky days, you might pay extra for selling squash that felt too smugly hydrated. No one wants to explain that to a tax officer with a stick carved like a thundercloud. And then there were the measurement tools themselves. You pass by one now, a stone bowl inset into a pillar, its rim etched with spirals. Officially called an okoto omu, it functioned like a community rain gauge. Each neighbourhood had at least one. Elders would visit daily to note the height of water after each storm, adjusting tax estimates and scheduling prayers accordingly. If your household was seen scooping from it, well, that was a deeply awkward conversation, and usually ended with some kind of public apology dance. Still, the rules had wiggle room, and everyone seemed to know when to bend with the breeze. Take, for example, the soft-eyed woman near the row of clay pot vendors. She's tucking a coin under a plantain leaf beside her goods, not into the tax bowl but next to it. "A thank you," she murmurs. "My gourds swell better in the rainy months." You nod, of course. It makes sense. In Benin, gratitude counts as partial payment. Further down the row, a man hawks carved wooden gutters shaped like crocodiles. "Protect your roof and your soul," he cries. They bite spirits and redirect runoff in style. You stop to admire one. It's beautifully rendered, its gaping mouth fitted to catch drops, its tail curled like a question mark. When you ask if it's taxed, he laughs. Only if it actually collects water. For now it's just art. Clever. Here, art and utility dance constantly, and nowhere more so than in the rain jugs themselves. Some are tall and narrow with lids like hats, others squat and beaded, with curled handles that look suspiciously like frog legs. A few have spouts shaped like fish mouths, which burble quietly when poured. The tax scribes loved these. They could estimate a household's dues by the volume and type of jug used, cross-referencing local rainfall charts with known vessel behaviour. Honestly, it sounds like the world's sleepiest crime show. But there's another layer here, one you almost miss. Tucked in the back of the market near the herb sellers is a small platform with carvings of women holding gourds on their heads. This, an older man tells you, was where community rain dues were occasionally decided by dance. Yes, dance. Not the break your ankle kind, but ceremonial footwork where elders and young adults performed patterned steps in rhythm with rainfall records. Each misstep might represent a miscounted pot, each twirl a tribute to an especially generous storm. The smoother the performance, the lighter the tax burden for the week. The audience, usually half the town, cheered or groaned accordingly. Historians still debate whether these dances actually influenced tax policy, or whether it was just an elaborate way to keep civic morale high while sneakily exercising. Either way, it's clear that in Benin, accounting wasn't always done on paper. It wasn't all rain and roses, of course. There were disputes. Occasionally, one family accused another of hoarding runoff illegally. This typically involved redirecting your neighbour's roof drip into your own jug via a very suspicious hollow stick. But rather than fines or arrests, the punishment was usually social, being denied access to the public shade tree, or forced to retell your story in front of a laughing elders' council. That's how you end up being called Jug Sneak for the next 3 seasons. Even children weren't left out of the equation. In schoolyards tucked behind the market, kids played a game called Catch the Cloud, where they raced to fill miniature bowls with raindrops before they evaporated. The winner received dried cola nuts and the title of Junior Collector. Losers often had to sing an apology to the sky. The songs were deeply adorable, full of lines like, "Dear rain, we're clumsy and wet-footed, but we mean well." One teacher passes by and chuckles. It's important, he says, that they learn value not just in gold or food, but in water's gift, and in not being greedy about it. So you nod, watching the children tiptoe around their puddles, scooping drops with wide palms. Somewhere, just beneath the silliness and simplicity, is a deeper lesson about shared responsibility, something that modern economics textbooks often forget. The rain tax, you begin to realise, isn't just a matter of civic duty here. It's an invitation to see the sky as a partner. Each drop is both blessing and burden, each pot a promise, and each community a chorus singing softly between the storms. And you finally find a spot beside a modest shrine that smells of clay, flowers, and something a little bit citrusy. A perfect place to sit, breathe in the moisture-soaked air, and let your limbs stretch just a little heavier with rest. You've only just started to scratch the surface. The real intricacies, titles, rituals, seasonal loopholes, those await. But for now, under the fading echo of the last raindrops, you understand one thing for certain. In Benin, even the weather had to check in with the tax office. The path you're walking on now curves around a stand of young palms, their fronds still glittering with rain. A few goats wander nearby, chewing rhythmically, unfazed by the occasional shout from a distant trader, still arguing about whether soggy millet should really count as premium grain. You let the sound of low voices and damp leaves guide you deeper into the rhythm of the city, because it's time to learn about the scribes. They don't look like how you'd imagine them. No stiff robes, no ink-stained fingers hunched over parchment. The scribes of Benin who managed the rain tax were more like elegant conductors of a very peculiar symphony. You spot one now, lounging under a palm-thatched awning. Her scroll is stretched open across her lap, but she's not writing. She's humming. Apparently memorization came easier that way. You sit nearby, careful not to disturb her chalks. Yes, chalks. Instead of quills, these scribes used coloured sticks of pigment to mark changes in seasonal flow, vessel capacity and ritual obligations. Each colour meant something different. Red for loss, blue for excess, yellow for spiritual atonement, green for the particularly confusing "it rained but only a bit and mostly sideways" category, which, to be fair, does feel emotionally specific. She glances at you but says nothing, just tilts her head and hums a little louder. Historians still argue whether these colour-based records were fully codified or if they varied by district. Some scrolls unearthed in later years seem to contradict each other in how they measure volume or interpret drought. Others appear to be less about numbers and more about mood. One record from a particularly foggy season simply states, "Everyone felt damp and confused, which, fair." You stretch your legs, feeling the cobblestones warm beneath you. Across the courtyard, a trio of scribes gathers beneath a carved eave to discuss the latest rainfall entries. Their voices rise and fall like a sleepy debate club. Words like trickle appropriation, jug recalibration, and ritual excuse clauses drift over. You can't help but smile. Because here's the twist. The rain tax wasn't just about math. It was also about myth. The scribes were also storytellers, weaving rainfall into memory, anchoring the drips and drops to legends, taboos, and palace gossip. One scroll reads more like a play than a ledger. The water came strong on the third moon. Lady Edia claimed it sang to her mango tree. Scribe Obo disagreed but danced anyway. The tax was forgiven. Everyone clapped. This blurring of fact and fable made the rain tax remarkably hard to challenge. After all, if a storm is both an atmospheric event and the lingering sigh of a displeased ancestor, are you really going to argue about decimal points? And so, the scribes evolved into more than tax officials. They became memory keepers, cultural barometers, emotional auditors. If your rain jug cracked in an unlucky week, a sympathetic scribe might downgrade your dues to symbolic drizzle status. If you hosted a feast for the rain spirits, even with only fermented plantains and slightly suspicious catfish, you might earn a token exemption noted in poetic verse. You pass a young apprentice now, sitting cross-legged with a slate balanced on her knees. She's trying to copy a spiral glyph without smudging it, tongue peeking out in concentration. Her teacher hovers nearby, gently correcting her wrist angle. You hear softly, "Not just pretty, child. Spirals track the soul of storms. Every coil means another breath from the sky." Not just pretty. That line stays with you. You rise and follow the scent of oil and old paper to the central scribal archive, a round structure with a low doorway and narrow slits for airflow. Inside it's dim but humming. The air smells of charcoal ink, damp cloth and age. Scrolls line the walls in careful bundles, their ends painted with little dots, red, blue, yellow, green. You already know what they mean now. A particularly old scribe with an impressive beard like a rain cloud motions you closer. He's tracing a record from a century ago, whispering it softly as if telling a bedtime story to the walls. "Long rain, 3 goats born," he murmurs. "Palace roof collected more than needed. Queen laughed. No fines." You nod solemnly. That seems like a good year. In one corner, a massive rain chart stretches across an entire wall. It's like a map, but with time instead of space. Dots mark rainfall. Lines connect it to ritual events, birth years, even family squabbles over leaky roofs. One particularly rainy decade is called the soaking peace, while a short dry spell is labelled simply the week of many itches. Scholars still debate whether this refers to drought-related irritations or just a lice problem that got out of hand. But not everything here is ancient. The scribes also update community notices. A fresh sheet has just been pinned up. Notice: due to the enthusiastic storm last evening, jug counts for the Ober's ward will shift from 5 to 3 portions until Thursday. Also, please stop blaming your aunties for roof leaks. Thank you. You chuckle softly. Bureaucracy, with a side of family drama. Then, from a side alcove, comes the faint sound of drumming. 2 scribes are rehearsing a cadence used to announce rainfall thresholds. Yes, thresholds had songs. Apparently, if a rain lasted longer than a gourd's boiling time, it warranted public announcement via rhythmic chant, and someone walking around banging a pot. The pot was also taxed, but lightly. You take a moment to breathe in the quiet busyness of the archive. Every mark here, every swirl of pigment or scratch of chalk, represents not just a tax but a relationship. Between the people and their sky, between memory and moisture, between ritual and real life. You step outside into the afternoon light. which has that clean post-rain glow. The ground steams slightly. A pair of children squabble over who gets to jump into the deepest puddle. A cat is actively avoiding them both. And above it all, the clouds drift lazily, their job done, for now. As you keep walking, the thought lingers. In the Kingdom of Benin, even a ledger can sing, even a spreadsheet can dance. And somewhere in the margins of all that data and drizzle, humanity shines through. The rain tax wasn't cold, it was personal, a little messy, deeply poetic, and honestly, not a bad way to run a government. You follow the curve of a shallow canal now, your feet tapping against flagstones that have known centuries of careful use. The canal is man-made, elegantly channeled from the river to guide excess rainwater toward the city's lush inner gardens, and along its edges, squat, sun-baked and algae-touched, you find them, the collectors. These aren't collectors in the Victorian I hoard teaspoons and old buttons sense. No, these are the rainwater collectors of Benin, skilled labourers, engineers, and part-time philosophers who made sure that every drop that fell from the heavens found a purpose. And if the water wandered off track, well, there was a form to file, possibly two. You crouch beside one now. He's elderly, with a beard that curls like fern roots and eyes that don't miss a thing. His gourd ladle dips into a clay basin with the grace of muscle memory. Scoop, swirl, sip, spit, frown. That's third cycle runoff, he mutters. Tastes like lizard. He's not joking. Collectors like him were trained to taste the difference between fresh roof catch, first wash gutter flow, and the more dubious late puddle. Each had its own category, its own spiritual significance, and, yes, its own tax rate. First catch was often sacred, meant for ritual or the Ober's gardens. Mid-catch went to public use, like cooking or brewing. And last catch? Well, that depended on whether or not it smelled like something with legs had died in it. Historians still argue whether this form of water categorization was based more on practicality or ceremony. Some claim it was just a clever sanitation tactic wrapped in religious robes. Others argue that the rainwater was truly believed to change nature as it passed through certain hands or spaces. One mid-era scroll insists that water funneled through a priestess's courtyard learns patience. Another suggests that it merely picks up her chicken's opinions. Regardless, the collectors knew the system inside and out, quite literally. They maintained the clay jugs that dotted the streets, large, bulbous things shaped like upside-down question marks. They lined them with powdered charcoal and checked them after every downpour for cracks, contamination, or the occasional confused frog. And if a jug was damaged or left uncovered during a storm, there was a penalty. Not always a fine, mind you. Sometimes just a strongly worded song performed outside your house at dawn. You pass one of these public jugs now, half hidden beneath a baobab. Children dart past you, giggling, their sandals slapping water. One of them dips a little cup into the jug and slurps the contents with exaggerated reverence. "Spirit blessed," she declares. Her brother rolls his eyes. Nearby, a notice has been etched in red chalk onto a stone post. Residents of Oka Ward, Jug Snurrs 12 has been declared grouchy. Do not collect after dusk. Replacement lining underway. You tilt your head. Grouchy? Apparently, jugs were often anthropomorphized. Some were said to prefer drizzle, others to pout during wind. Local households gave them names. Jug number 7 was famously called Mama Tortoise for refusing to fill unless coaxed with a lullaby. And yes, there were taxes associated with these peculiar personalities. If your ward's jug was known to be high maintenance, you got a small leniency in your rainfall dues, provided you recorded your coaxing efforts in a community log. Collectors had to document everything. The ledgers weren't just numbers, they were filled with marginalia. Drawings of cracked pots, notes on neighbourhood gossip, tiny doodles of clouds that looked judgmental. One collector's log famously included a running commentary on his favourite beetle, whom he named Little Taxman and drew weekly wearing different hats. You stroll on past a row of storage huts where spare rain funnels hang like wind chimes. The collectors here are younger, chatting as they patch a leaky gutter with palm fibre and tar. One swats away a mosquito with a grunt. Another carefully trims vines that threaten to clog a drainage spout. Their tools are simple: baskets, ladles, chisels. But their coordination is ballet. Each gesture has rhythm, rooted in training passed down from master to apprentice for generations. There's pride here, you realise. Not just in keeping the water clean and flowing, but in making sure the system works for everyone. The rain, after all, did not discriminate, but gutters could, and jugs cracked faster in poorer wards, so collectors doubled as advocates. They noted patterns, they filed complaints. If rainfall flowed unfairly toward elite compounds, collectors might petition the Ober's court to relevel a street, redig a trench, or install new catchments in lower quarters. One collector even staged a minor protest by filling his sandals with rainwater and squelching through the palace gates in silence. The Ober was reportedly amused. A tax adjustment followed. But here's where it gets even more delightful. Some collectors moonlighted as musicians, because of course, water has rhythm. The drip of a gourd, the plink of runoff hitting pottery, the slap of palm fronds in a downpour. It all became music. Late at night, once the city had quieted and the clouds were still, collectors would gather to perform what they called Ego Ute. Roughly, songs from the wet ledger. They tapped, poured, and drummed on their tools, composing lullabies from the daily flow. One surviving tune, passed down orally, includes a chorus about a particularly rude rainstorm that came sideways, kicked over 3 goats, and left no tip. As you pass a house where water still trickles off the eaves, you spot a small altar nestled beside the rain jug. It holds 3 kola nuts, a carved wooden frog, and a curl of smoke rising from palm oil incense. A small sign reads, "Thank you for yesterday's blessing. Please aim better next time." Apparently, even the gods get feedback. Before the tax collectors arrive tomorrow, robed and serene with their chalkboards and little boxes for leaf tokens, the collectors will have made their rounds. They'll know which households collected too much, which let their jugs overflow, which quietly sold their water on the side. That last one happened more often than you'd think, though sometimes it was just kids offering deluxe rain juice to travellers for a cowrie or two. And if your jug lid was stolen, the collector would file a lid compensation grievance, possibly with an attached drawing of your bewildered goat as a witness. You reach the end of the canal now. The air is cooler, fresher. Somewhere above, thunder rolls like an old man stretching his back. The collectors glance skyward, not with dread, but anticipation. Another shift begins. The sky will pour, the jugs will fill, and across the Kingdom of Benin, the collectors will quietly, gracefully keep the peace between cloud and clay. You keep walking, your sandals brushing against the packed earth, now darkened in patches from the last drizzle. A soft breeze ruffles your tunic, carrying the scent of wet bark, roasted cassava, and, oddly enough, a hint of something floral and fermented. Maybe it's that local palm wine stand again, still fermenting in cracked clay jugs that never get washed, only seasoned. You've reached a courtyard now, spacious and irregular, paved with worn stones and surrounded by low-slung homes with red walls of mud brick. And sitting in the centre, like some silent referee between sky and soil, is a tax officer. Not the fearsome kind with scrolls and scowls. No, this one's more sleepily majestic. He's old, bearded, and dressed in folds of indigo cotton dyed so many times it looks like midnight melted. He reclines on a mat, one hand resting on a notched wooden tablet, the other stirring a bowl of millet porridge with the kind of focus reserved for either meditation or breakfast. This is an Akawa, one of Benin's rain tax assessors, and yes, rainwater needed assessing. See, the system wasn't just about measuring who got how much, it was about measuring how they got it, when they stored it, and why they used it. Water for healing was taxed differently from water for brewing beer. Water used during religious ceremonies, exempt if you could prove it. One well-known story tells of a woman who hosted 10 ancestral rituals in a week, each with suspiciously large tubs and a lot of parched neighbours hanging around. The tax board eventually confronted her and ended up joining for drinks. You step closer to the Okoa. He eyes you without alarm and taps his stylus against the tablet, revealing rows of tiny grooves and notches. No paper here, just memory encoded in wood. The spacing and length of each notch indicate rainfall amounts, collection behaviour, and the owner's known attitude toward roof maintenance. Your name's probably not on there. Yet. But if you moved in, you'd get a visit, a few polite questions, and possibly a small ceremony involving yams and gossip. Historians still argue whether the Okoa's tablets were purely mnemonic tools, or if they doubled as early proto-abacuses. Some even suggest they were sung, not read. Each notch representing a beat in a recited poem that detailed everything from roof pitch to neighbourhood etiquette. One preserved line, loosely translated, goes, "He who hoards the drizzle loses the downpour. Also, his roof leaks." You notice the Okoa's assistant now, a younger woman, alert and amused. She balances a small basket of cola nuts on her head, and tied around her waist is a pouch of dyed cowrie shells. Each shell represents a different rain behaviour. Trickle, torrent, sideways assault, and that annoying kind where it just mists you like a moody garden sprayer. She's here for verification. If someone claims, "Oh, it didn't rain at my house," she checks the gutters, the jug weights, and sometimes just asks a local goat. Goats, it turns out, are excellent indicators of rainfall. If they're still damp and frowning, the sky has spoken. She gives you a little nod and continues on. Her next stop, a compound where rumours say the tenants built a secret underground reservoir lined with smuggled palace tiles. Possibly true. Possibly just a jealous neighbour who once slipped on moss and never forgave it. You take a seat on a nearby bench. A child offers you a roasted plantain wrapped in leaves, and you accept, peeling it slowly as the air hums with quiet routine. The Okoa is now mid-visit with a local elder, debating whether his roof qualifies as porous enough to allow tax exemption. The elder argues it's a divine punishment for singing too loudly. The Okoa argues it's just termites. Meanwhile, the assistant scribes a number into a stick of chalk, not onto paper, onto the elder's wall. Rain tax declarations were often marked publicly, outside doors, on jug bases, even etched into fence posts. The numbers weren't shaming, they were more like reminders. They said, "This household participates, this home contributes to the harmony of the rainfall." But if a house had no marks, that raised eyebrows. You pass one such unmarked home now. It's quiet, the door closed tight, shutters drawn even on a humid day. A few neighbours glance at it, then away. The gossip drifts over to you like steam. The man inside refuses to pay the rain tax, claiming he talks to clouds directly. No one's sure if he's mad, devout, or just extremely committed to being dry. Still, the tax system made room for oddballs. If someone had a unique belief or method for managing rainwater, say, singing to it, or painting messages on their rooftop, the assessors had a protocol. They'd observe, sometimes join in, and then quietly write a supplementary verse into the tax poem. One Okoa even introduced a new rain category, ambiguous drizzle. You take another bite of plantain as a boy runs past with a wax-sealed gourd marked ceremonial only. It sloshes like a bathtub full of gossip. And sure enough, behind him follows a man with a ledger under one arm and a suspiciously polite smile. Either a taxman or someone about to ask you for your exact date of birth for an astrology chart. Here's the thing. The rain tax wasn't just a mechanism for resource management. It was an expression of rhythm. Benin saw water not as a threat or a nuisance, but as a dance partner, one that could be graceful or grumpy, generous or stingy. You paid tribute, not because you feared the rain, but because you shared something with it. A season, a street, a ceiling. One quirky tradition even had residents writing tiny poems on palm leaves and placing them under their jugs. If the rain fell while the poem was still legible, it was considered a generous downpour and taxed lightly. If the leaf melted into mush, sorry, premium rates. The assistant returns, drops a cowrie into a shallow bowl and announces, "Third Ward West is cleared for the week. No unrecorded flow, no suspicious puddles, and only 2 frogs reported using Jug Nareen as a dating site." Everyone chuckles, including the frogs probably. You begin walking again, the sun dipping low behind the trees, shadows stretching like gossip across the street. Around you, the sounds of evening take over. Soft talking, the shuffle of sandals, a gourd slapping water in slow rhythm. The Akoa and his assistant begin to pack up. Tomorrow they'll visit another ward, but tonight the sky is calm, the jugs are full, and the Kingdom of Benin, ever pragmatic, ever poetic, has made peace with the rain once again. You've moved on from the courtyard now, taking a winding path shaded by tall raffia palms, their fan-like leaves clacking together softly overhead like gossiping aunties. Your feet pad against the baked clay, and the late afternoon air carries the musky tang of thatch, charcoal smoke, and a hint of fish stew just beginning to simmer. You follow your nose naturally. You arrive at a long sloping street lined with workshops, places where rhythm matters more than conversation. Hammers tapping bronze, threads pulled taut on looms, wood chisels scraping with a kind of sleepy precision. Benin's artisans, known across the region for their mastery, never seemed to stop crafting, and somehow always managed to make it look like a hobby they did between naps. And nestled between 2 metalworkers, there's a shop that's neither flashy nor loud, a rain jug craftsman. Not just any jugs, though. These are tax-regulated, state-observed, occasionally song-blessed water jugs. If you're a serious collector of cloud juice, this is where you go. One wall displays giant urns shaped like bent gourds. Another has smaller ones, more decorative, carved with patterns resembling raindrops, frogs, or the elegant spiral of a snail shell. And near the back, the real prize, a declaration jug. You squint, it's huge, easily as tall as a goat, made of polished terracotta with etchings around the lip that form a kind of legal border. That's right, legal text. Carved directly onto the vessel, the script includes the household's tax classification, last 3 years of rain yield, and a poetic clause reminding neighbours not to steal from it. Something about the wrath of parched ancestors deterring thieves. Sleepy threats, really, but effective. In the Kingdom of Benin, water containers weren't just tools, they were declarations. Owning a finely made jug marked you as someone who respected the social contract, the unspoken agreement between earth, sky, and your slightly judgmental neighbour. Now, there's still a scholarly squabble about how these jugs were officially certified. Some argue the craftsmen attended state ceremonies where royal officials dipped ceremonial feathers into the jug to test the echo. If the jug sang back, a soft whoosh or tone, it was deemed worthy. Others believe the certification came from village elders tapping the bass while making weirdly specific jokes. One account from a Portuguese visitor claims he witnessed a pot being rejected because it sounded too eager. Eager pots or not, every household had its preferences. Some preferred short, wide jugs, less prone to tipping when the goats got nosy. Others swore by tall, narrow types that filtered leaves out naturally. And then there were the artistic types who requested elaborate patterns, swirling lines representing rainfall over the months, frog motifs to invoke luck, or even scenes of lovers beneath umbrellas. Umbrellas that wouldn't be invented for another few centuries but were imagined here in baked clay nonetheless. A fringe but fascinating theory claims that some of these jugs were singing pots, built with hidden air vents or odd shapes that, when wind passed through them, made low, resonant tones. Whether that's true or just a result of too many archaeologists getting lost in the museum basement after a long lunch, we may never know. But you have to admit, The idea of rain filling a jug while it softly hums back? Pretty magical. You run your fingers along one of the simpler designs, smooth to the touch, still faintly warm from the sun. A small glyph near the base catches your eye, a frog sitting on a spiral. According to local custom, that meant the jug had absorbed first rain, which was thought to be spiritually potent. Not everyone wanted that. First rain was often dusty, mysterious, or even accused of carrying spirits too eager to wake up after the dry season. You watch the jug maker work, his hands caked in the ochre-red clay. He's humming a rhythm older than the walls around him, shaping the future into something that can hold the sky. A few children scamper past, tossing pebbles and arguing over whose jug at home collects rain faster. The answer, of course, is whichever jug sits closer to the gossiping roof eaves, where stories and water drip in equal measure. The craftsman nods toward you, offers a chunk of dried ginger, and points to a half-finished pot. "Not ready," he murmurs, still dreaming of clouds. You take his meaning. Even jugs have to settle in before they serve. The regulation of jugs was no small feat. Palatial record keepers tracked which neighbourhoods had declared vessels, which homes were off-registry, and which citizens had reported theft, overflow, or frog-related infractions. And while most of the tax records have been lost to time or monsoon-related accidents, oral traditions preserve the bureaucratic drama. Like the tale of a nobleman whose 3 jugs were so ornate, people came from villages away just to admire them. One day, they mysteriously vanished. The man claimed sabotage by jealous rivals. But a clever boy followed a trail of wet footprints and discovered them, in the nobleman's own root cellar. He'd hidden them to avoid tax on an unusually soggy week. The punishment? Public embarrassment and having to host a festival ironically titled The Rain Remembers. Some believe jug size was used as a subtle measure of civic pride. You weren't just storing water, you were announcing to the world, "Look how well I prepare. Look how politely I borrow from the clouds." And if your jug cracked or overflowed too easily, well, people talked. One dusty theory even suggests the king himself kept a royal jug, gilded, enormous, and guarded not just for water but for symbolic reasons. Only filled once a year, it was then ceremonially emptied by royal wives, each tipping a bit into their own jugs, symbolising the redistribution of cosmic blessings. No one's entirely sure if this actually happened, or if it was a metaphor invented by court poets who were trying to impress someone. Still, the reverence for the vessels lingers. You pass another home where a jug sits proudly in a niche by the doorway. A hen is perched on the lid, clucking softly, while a toddler nearby taps it like a drum. From inside, a woman laughs, calling out, "That jug knows more secrets than your grandfather." And maybe it does. Maybe each pot shaped by clay and sun, and the whisper of a craftsman's breath, holds not just water, but a bit of the season it was born in. A memory of the day's weather, the quiet complaint of the sky, the soft sigh of clouds being patient. The sun has dipped a little lower now. Shadows stretch like yawns across the lane, and the craftsman wipes his hands clean with a bundle of straw, then begins lighting the first small lanterns around his shop. Not for visibility. He knows the pots by touch. It's more for ritual. The same way you might light a candle before a bath. A quiet sign that the day's rhythm is softening. You sit for a while, leaning back against the warm clay wall, watching the flicker of lamplight on half-finished jugs. All around you, the city hums, not loudly, not frantically, but with the gentle certainty of a place that knows rain will come. It always does. The street darkens by degrees, not suddenly, but with a gentle curtain-like fade, as if the daylight is excusing itself politely from the stage. You've wandered farther now, away from the rhythmic taps of metal and clay, into the quieter residential quarter of the kingdom. This is where families eat, argue, gossip, and, most importantly, collect rain. And here is where you meet a local ledger keeper. Not a high priest or a palace scribe, no. just a middle-aged woman with a fondness for tamarind and an impeccable sense of fairness. She doesn't wear royal robes, but her reputation for exactitude is so well known that even the Ober's cousin sent her gifts of yam paste during the rainy season. You greet her as she squats under the eaves, checking a list scrawled on dried palm bark, her fingers stained with charcoal ink. She barely looks up. "You declare your jug?" she asks, not unkindly. You gesture vaguely to the left. She nods, pretending to mark something. "Too late now," she mumbles. "Sky's already halfway through its shift." This is a household ledger keeper, part record keeper, part neighbourhood referee, part ceremonial nag. Every residential quarter had at least one, often two, if one of them liked to disappear for love affairs or elaborate dreams. Their job? Ensuring the correct water quotas were declared and documented. In most kingdoms, that would mean dull counting and dry ledgers. But in Benin, it meant community gossip, micro-dramas, and ritualized exaggeration. See, water taxes weren't just about how much rain you caught. They were about where you caught it, when, and whether the spirits had smiled on your method. Some roofs were favoured by fortune, others jinxed by ill-positioned fig trees. So ledger keepers often found themselves embroiled in hyperlocal disputes, like the famous quarrel between two neighbours, one who claimed her neighbour's chicken kept drinking from her jug at night, thus reducing her taxable yield. The accused chicken, never seen again. But her owner suddenly owned a new cooking pot and avoided eye contact for weeks. Historians still argue whether these local tax assessors were formally trained or simply trusted by tradition. Some suggest they had to pass memory tests, reciting rain patterns backwards or naming all the roof types in the city without blinking. Others believe they were chosen by dreams, visions of frogs balancing dewdrops on their heads, or of ancestors wagging fingers while sitting inside jugs. What we do know is that they kept detailed, if not always accurate, records. Palm fronds woven with symbols, bits of charcoal scrollwork, even pots themselves engraved with declarations. Sometimes a ledger would simply be a song, a sung poem detailing how many bowls of rainwater were collected that week, and whether the spirit sneezed while it happened. You ask this particular ledger keeper how long she's been doing it. She blinks, sucks on a bit of bitter cola and says, "Since my second husband ran off with the tax official, I took over both jobs." Fair enough. She lets you flip through one of her books, actually a stack of split bamboo strips bound with twine. The writing is precise but playful, with notes like, "Mrs. Aurora underreported again, probably because her son is lazy," or "Too much mango tree shade, jug location suspicious." There are smiley faces, doodles of clouds, and what looks suspiciously like a crude sketch of a rain deity with very fashionable sandals. More than just numbers, these records offer personality. Rain tracking in Benin was part art, part intuition, part mutual performance. You weren't just taxed, you participated in a seasonal drama. You made offerings, adjusted your jug's position, gossiped about whose barrel overflowed too early, a sign of greed probably, and quietly hoped no frogs made a nest in yours. And the city took notice. In fact, once every 3 months during the long rainy stretch, there was a day known as the Declaration Parade. You may be picturing something grand with floats and gold-plated banners. It wasn't quite that. Think more. Slow shuffle of proud households bringing their finest jugs to the plaza, each with a sprig of something fragrant tied around the handle. Basil, lemongrass. Sometimes just a leaf someone said was lucky. The royal auditors, dressed more like drummers than bureaucrats, would inspect each jug with a practiced ear. They tapped, they sniffed. They sometimes bit the rim, which no one really understood, but tradition is tradition. Then came the community judgments, whispers and murmurs. "Oh, the Elwicker family switched to a high-roofed jug this year, fancy." Or, "That one's cracked. You can tell he left it out during the Talking Thunder." Talking Thunder, in case you're wondering, is a night when the thunder rolls but doesn't rain, considered a time of ancestral argument. Very poor time to harvest. Some fringe accounts claim that if your jug was especially beautiful or clever, it might be borrowed for a palace ritual. Whether this was an honour or a curse depends on who you ask. One story tells of a woman whose jug was taken and returned the next week, glowing faintly and forever slightly cold. She refused to use it ever again, convinced it whispered. The formal goal of all this, of course, was taxation. Jugs were measured not just by volume, but by spiritual receptivity and social behaviour. If your jug filled too fast, people might say you bribed the clouds. If it filled too slowly, perhaps your family had offended a river god. So tax rates had to reflect more than physics. They had to respect politics, myth, and good old-fashioned favouritism. One historian, who clearly spent too much time among poets, suggests that Benin's rain tax system was actually a ritualised weather conversation, where each citizen responded to the sky's offerings with gratitude, gossip, or passive-aggressive pottery placement. Sounds about right. The ledger keeper stands now, stretches her back and points to the sky. "Smells like second rain," she says. You sniff. Dust. Distant moisture. Possibly okra stew. She nods sagely, writes something on her strip of bamboo, and then begins whistling a tune designed to summon wind. It's soft and irregular, like the sound of palm fronds shivering. And just then, a single drop falls. Not dramatic, not symbolic, just a cool plop on your forehead. The kind that makes you blink once, then smile. The ledger keeper grins. "Better cover your jug," she says, walking inside. You glance up. The clouds have thickened like old blankets. All across the neighbourhood, people emerge with lids, scoops, measuring bowls. But no rush. The rain will come whether or not you panic. In Benin, rain has always been seen as punctual but not hurried. A guest who stays for tea whether invited or not. You lean against a doorway, watching rooftops darken in patches, the first lines of water tracing their lazy path down the clay. Somewhere, frogs begin tuning their voices, readying a chorus. A neighbour shouts something cheerful. A child runs out barefoot, arms raised in triumph. And in the distance, another ledger keeper starts singing the first lines of a new rain declaration. You can't make out the words, but the melody sounds like a calendar turning. You spend the night in a guest hut tucked behind a courtyard full of sleepy roosters and the faint smell of roasted yam peel. Morning in Benin creeps in gently, all ochre light, and the rhythmic sweep of brooms made from bound palm fibres. You stretch under a mosquito net strung like a forgotten dream and feel the throb of yesterday's story still echoing in your head. A few old voices outside argue about yesterday's rainfall, whether it was truly a second rain or merely an overeager cloud pretending to be one. A chicken clucks loudly as if to weigh in. You rise and follow the sound of scraping metal, drawn toward the palace district again, not for another jug dispute, but for something quieter, more meticulous. How the Ober's administrators turned rainfall into revenue without spiralling into chaos or civil war. Because here's the thing, the rainwater tax system only worked because someone, several someones actually, figured out how to turn scattered declarations and gossipy ledgers into usable state records. And these someones were the scribes of the Iwebo Guild. Now, Iwebo isn't a name you throw around lightly. You don't casually ask someone if their cousin's dating an Iwebo scribe, unless you want silence to fall like a dropped gourd. These were the knowledge keepers of Benin, the guild entrusted with preserving royal ceremonies, state rituals and bureaucratic sanity. If the Ober sneezed, the Iwebo knew whether it was symbolic, and yes, they were the ones who tabulated the rainwater tax. Your walk takes you past two sculpted leopards flanking the scribe's compound. They're not just decorative. Leopards in Benin symbolize royalty, stealth, and quiet power. The same traits you'll need to adopt now, unless you want to interrupt a calculation ceremony. So you slip off your sandals and tiptoe inside. At first glance, the scribe hall looks like an ordinary clay-walled room, albeit one full of scrolls, bells, and damp ink. But then you notice the rhythmic hum, a low, steady chant like bees inside a drum. The scribes are singing the rainfall numbers, Not reading them, not reciting them from memory. Singing. It's part mnemonic, part meditation. See, every month's rainfall figures, down to each jug, each rooftop, each neighbourhood, were converted into verses that could be memorised, passed down or corrected in rhythm. OK Street. 4 jugs plus a jealous frog. Rain came hard, broke 1 log, and so on. Historians still argue whether this system was a practical necessity due to the climate's effect on parchment, or whether it was just cultural flair taken to bureaucratic extremes. One theory claims that the singing helped discourage tampering. After all, changing a figure mid-verse would throw off the melody, unless of course you were a truly gifted singer with corrupt intentions. There's always one. You sit quietly as one scribe, an elder with a voice like driftwood, walks up and places a carved token on a large clay map of the city. Each token is shaped differently. A jug, a roof, a palm frond, a frog. They correspond to categories of rainfall and related tax values. No spreadsheets, no calculators, just carved symbols and memory. Then comes the sorting. Not everyone owes the same. Rainwater from a palace roof with its elaborate drains and auspicious placement is taxed differently than that of a weaver's flat hut. There are discounts for community wells, exemptions for widows, and, this is where things get fascinating, honour levies. Yes, honour levies. If a household consistently over-reports or produces unusually clean water, they might be charged slightly more, not out of punishment, but as a compliment. Your household is clearly favoured by the spirits, an Iwibo official might say, nodding solemnly, so you have the honour of giving extra. It's taxation disguised as a compliment. You've probably met a modern version of that at your local coffee shop tip jar, but despite the poetic system, there was serious political weight behind the process. Rainfall tax revenue helped fund palace rituals, neighbourhood festivals and infrastructure projects, particularly drainage canals and ceremonial pools. It wasn't just about water, it was about civic order. A community that collected rain respectfully was seen as spiritually aligned. A community that didn't? Well, best to brace for frogs. Every so often, the Iwibo scribes would submit an overview scroll to the Oba's advisors. Not a ledger in the Western sense, more like a performance document. A scroll with symbols, verses, and yes, occasional doodles of clouds with stern expressions. One even had a small painted arrow pointing at a house marked suspected umbrella hoarder. Probably an inside joke. There are rumours, of course there are, that certain scribes could manipulate rainfall records subtly, using ambiguous phrasing or multiple interpretations of the same word. In one famously disputed scroll, the word for overflowing jug was also used in a love poem to mean heart that spills joy. Was the jug full, or just emotionally overwhelmed? The tax board was not amused, but this complexity had an upside. It allowed Benin's rain tax system to be graceful, as the title of our journey tonight promises, flexible, human. Instead of rigid laws enforced with fines and jail time, taxation was a shared ritual, with built-in loopholes for joy, sorrow, celebration, and mistake. Forgot to declare your jug? Organise a neighbourhood rain dance as a form of apology? Collected too much water by accident? Donate some to the community shrine and reset the count. It wasn't loopholes, it was living governance. One scribe gestures for you to approach. She's young, with fingers stained blue from crushed berries used in ink. She asks if you've ever made a rainfall chant. You shake your head. She grins and teaches you one. It starts with a splash, then moves to a rhythmic clapping on your thigh. The words are nonsense to you, but the rhythm feels ancient. When she finishes, she says something half-whispered. Each drop has a number, but only we give it a name. You nod solemnly, as if that makes immediate sense. You exit the scribe hall blinking in the sunlight, your ears still humming with chants and tax codes. The streets outside seem livelier now. Buckets overflow in courtyards. Children test water depth by dipping their ankles and then shrieking as if they've touched the Arctic. You pass a stand selling small charms, carved from driftwood, shaped like jugs. Rain luck, the seller tells you. You buy 2. As you head back through the winding alleys, your fingers still tapping that chant rhythm on your leg, you start to see the rain tax system not as a strange quirk of history, but as something that, somehow, made people feel connected. To the sky, yes, but also to each other. To the scribes who sang their jugs into ledgers. To the neighbours who side-eyed your overflowing gutter. To the gods, even, who sometimes withheld rain just to see what you do about it. All taxation should be this musical, you think. A goat nearby sneezes as if in agreement. You wake again, this time not to roosters or brooms, but to the sound of a conch shell being blown somewhere in the distance. Long, low, and slightly mournful, like the sigh of a particularly dramatic cloud. It's the signal for the start of the Ober's public day, which means palace gates are opening, and courtiers are adjusting their hats with nervous precision. But you're headed somewhere much quieter. You pull on your softest, least suspicious tunic and follow a path that curls behind the palace like an afterthought. It's shaded with breadfruit trees and moss-covered stone slabs, where older residents sit and comment on everyone's business under the pretense of sharpening sticks. You're looking for a narrow courtyard known only to a few, where the women of Benin met to negotiate their roles in the kingdom's rainfall rituals. You arrive to find a small gathering already underway. No loud declarations, no palm wine-fueled debates. Just a circle of stools, a mat of woven reeds, and the unmistakable rustle of importance wrapped in gentle conversation. Because here's the surprise no one ever seems to expect. The Kingdom of Benin's rainwater tax system was not just a top-down operation controlled by palace scribes and male guilds. It was sustained, quietly, persistently by women. Market women, shrine women, rain callers, matriarchs who oversaw rooftop design, even the ones who stirred the ink with fingers that had also soothed fevers and ground cassava. One of them beckons you closer, patting the mat beside her. Her wrapper is a faded swirl of blues and greens, the colours of rainfall if you squint kindly. She introduces herself simply as Mama Aye, though the others call her Rain Mother. She tells you with a half smile and full authority that it was always women who decided when a rooftop collection crossed from honest harvest to cheeky hoarding. A widow with 3 daughters could be granted more leniency. A prosperous fish seller known to flirt with tax agents, maybe not. Historians still argue whether these women held official power, titles, salaries, recorded influence, or whether their authority was more social than legal. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in the middle. Their decisions were respected because they were embedded in the fabric of the community. You could ignore a scroll. You couldn't ignore your auntie clapping her hands and calling you out in front of the cassava stall. You watch as the women demonstrate a simple but crucial ritual. The rain jar circle. It's disarmingly basic. 7 water jars are placed in a ring on the ground, each representing a virtue: patience, generosity, fairness, humour, humility, memory, and protection. During the rainy season, when disputes over water rights or taxation simmered, people were invited to walk the circle barefoot, 1 jar at a time, whispering their concerns and listening for echoes. Literal echoes. If your whisper bounced back from the jars in a certain way, it was considered a divine hint. You try it. At the jar of humour, your whisper returns as a low gurgle. The women giggle. One mutters, "This one is cheeky. Must be from the north." You don't argue. The jars aren't just spiritual props. They're databanks in disguise. The women collect patterns. Who comes, how often, what concerns they express. If there's a surge in complaints about rooftop taxes, they know it's time to nudge the Awibo. Not directly, of course. That would be rude. But maybe a small calabash of cola nuts is left on the scribe's doorstep, along with a note that simply reads, "Jar 5 overflowed." There are also chants, different from the scribe chants. These are more like lullabies with a purpose. One you hear is sung to children to teach them what types of rainfall are taxable. First rain's gift, we greet and sip. Second rain's debt, we catch and tip. Third rain hides in pots so wide, don't forget what drips inside. And here's where it gets even better. The women don't just regulate water, they regulate gossip. Which, in a community where taxation depends partly on social understanding, is almost the same thing. You learn that if a household consistently avoids rain declarations, they might be subjected to story circulation, a slow-moving rumour, crafted not to humiliate but to gently pressure. Something like, "Ah, I hear their rooftop is so dry, even frogs are moving out." That kind of thing. It's gentle accountability with a poetic twist, and occasionally a frog reference. Mama leans toward you and says, "We don't need scrolls to know when water's being hidden. Water has a way of speaking, and so do we." There's also the matter of the rain guardians. These were a loosely organised group of elder women, usually past childbearing age, deeply respected, who would patrol certain neighbourhoods after a heavy rain, not to spy, but to listen, to feel. Some walked barefoot through puddles and declared whether a rooftop had spilled too much or too little. One carried a wooden spoon she used as a water level gauge and also apparently as a cane when needed. Legend has it she once tapped a corrupt minor chief on the ankle so hard he never lied about his rainpots again. Historians still debate whether the rain guardians were real or part of a kind of living allegory, like a moral story that got mistaken for an institution. But then someone always finds an old spoon or hears a childhood song and the mystery breathes again. And then there's the spiritual angle. Rain in Benin wasn't just meteorology, it was mood, ancestral approval, divine messaging. The rain priests, and sometimes priestesses, were consulted on droughts and excess alike, and women played a pivotal role in these rituals. You get the chance to witness one. A young woman in a robe of silver-dyed raffia stands in the centre of a cleared circle. Around her, clay bowls of scented water, petals, charcoal lines on the dirt like soft lightning bolts. She sings, not words, but syllables that rise and fall like a wind passing through reeds. Then she dips her fingers into each bowl one by one, lifting droplets skyward as if returning borrowed coins to the clouds. The ritual is private, not official, certainly not taxable, but it shows you something essential. The tax on rainwater may have begun as a system of revenue, but it became something else, a shared language between people and sky, a ritual of measurement wrapped in music, memory, and matrilineal wisdom. Women weren't just enforcers, they were interpreters. As the gathering winds down, someone offers you a small charm, a gourd-shaped bead on a leather string. For balance, they say. You don't ask what kind of balance, you already know. On your way out of the courtyard, a little girl waves at you and shouts, "Don't forget your jars." You pat your pocket and realise she means your imagination. Rain jars aren't just clay. They're how people kept order without losing warmth. How a kingdom turned droplets into dignity. How women, through rituals and riddles, quietly kept the taxman honest. Not bad for a system built on something that literally falls from the sky for free. You blink, and you're somewhere else again. Same red soil underfoot, but now it's drier, dustier. The seasons shifted. Rain has taken a break, and with it, the mood of the Kingdom of Benin has subtly changed. People walk a bit slower under the sun's thick gaze. The air smells of roasting yam and dry leaves, with only a hint of last month's puddles clinging to the shade. You trail behind a small group of men and women winding through the outer precincts of the city. They're carrying baskets, tools, ledgers, and, perhaps most curiously, an awkward bundle of bamboo sticks tied with palm fibre. You follow the bamboo because of course you do. That's where the interesting things always seem to be. Turns out this is one of the kingdom's semi-official inspection parties, informally dubbed the Drip Patrol. Their job is to spot unreported rainwater collection systems, especially the sneakily designed ones. See, when you're a particularly clever roof builder, you might craft eaves that channel rain invisibly, into side jars buried in earth, or into underground cisterns disguised as vegetable pits. Ingenious, really, and deeply suspicious. The patrol stops at a compound with a suspiciously green garden in a dry season. A woman emerges with the calm smile of someone who definitely has something to hide. What follows is less a confrontation and more a dance. First comes the greeting, elaborate, slow, laced with compliments. Then comes the casual question, uttered while fanning oneself with a plantain leaf. "Ah, sister, your ugu looks so fresh. Does the sky still weep for you alone?" She laughs. "No, oh, it's just compost magic." Someone produces one of the bamboo sticks. It's hollowed out and used to test for subterranean jars. Tap, tap, thud. The ground doesn't echo. A few eyebrows rise. And here's the beautiful part. Nobody gets dragged away. There's no shouting, no fines slapped on the spot. Instead, a polite note is written on palm parchment and placed discreetly on the compound's shrine step. "We see your bounty. May your gifts soon be shared." That's your tax notice. Historians still argue whether such patrols were formalised under royal edict or functioned more as civic rituals guided by precedent and peer pressure. The surviving scrolls suggest both. One dusty record notes that the 5th year of Oba Ozolua's reign saw 13 new Eve Watchers appointed, while another simply reads, "Let the jars speak for themselves." You continue with the team to a row of homes known as the Tilted Line. The name comes from how their rooftops slant a bit too eagerly, practically inviting water into hidden crevices. They say these homes were designed by a retired sculptor who found a new muse in hydraulics. You knock on one door and are greeted by an elderly man who offers you a calabash of lukewarm yam beer. He claims innocence and invites you to look around. "Even my ducks are thirsty," he says, motioning to two very full-looking ducks waddling near what might definitely be a disguised cistern. Someone in the group, probably the scribe in training, notes the presence of abundant poultry with damp feet in the ledger. You catch a glimpse of the page. It's a charming blend of formal report and casual gossip. Roof may be over-enthusiastic. Ducks suspect. There's even a section in these reports for excuses given. Some favourites you hear include, "My nephew sneezed and accidentally redirected the drain pipe. The wind has a mind of its own this year. I thought the jars were decorative, I swear." Apparently the best excuse of the decade came from a famous potter who claimed her rain jars were actually failed experiments. "They're cracked," she insisted, "just emotionally." She wasn't fined, she was given a commission. All of this may sound unserious, but it isn't. It's simply laced with grace. The goal isn't punishment, it's preservation. Because too much hoarding affects the community. That one secretly full jar today could mean one less shared basin during next month's dry spell. And the people of Benin, for all their artistry and flair, understand balance. Rain must circulate just like stories and cola nuts. The inspection group stops to rest under a mango tree. Out come small parcels of food. Groundnut cakes wrapped in leaves, roasted plantains, chewy bits of smoked catfish. There's laughter, a few off-key songs, even a mock trial where someone is playfully accused of hiding clouds in his pockets. This isn't bureaucracy, it's communal care with a strong sense of humour. As you snack, one of the scribes tells you about a recurring joke passed down through generations of rain tax writers. It's known as the parable of the leaky pot. In it, a farmer swears his pot doesn't collect rain. But each night someone hears dripping. The pot's full, but the man insists it weeps with joy. So the taxmen, respecting the pot's feelings, tax its tears instead. The punchline? He paid in sadness, which somehow still makes everyone laugh. Historians still puzzle over how deeply satire and storytelling were embedded in the enforcement of civic duties. Was it just a cultural flourish, or a strategic way to soften the edges of taxation? Either way, the records suggest humour wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalised. One tax ledgers from the late 1600s even includes doodles, tiny umbrellas, frowning clouds, and in one corner a toad in royal robes labelled Chief Drizzle. You move with the group toward one last compound before the sun begins to bow out. Here, things get a little tense. The homeowner is new to the area, recently arrived from a coastal province with slightly different traditions. He's built a rooftop that's not just sloped, it's terraced, multi-tiered, like a birthday cake designed by a water engineer. He insists it's for aesthetic purposes. I miss the sea, he shrugs. But the inspectors know better. Water slides perfectly along the layers, draining into a hidden pit. It's a marvel of design, and a marvel of tax evasion. A quiet conversation follows. The man isn't fined. He's invited to a rain jar circle instead. "We understand longing," says one inspector gently, "but let the rain flow like memory, not profit." As the sun sets, the patrol wraps up its day's work with a final tradition, pouring a few drops of clean water onto the base of a sacred Iroko tree near the palace walls. It's not a bribe, it's gratitude, a thank you to the sky, the soil, the unseen roots that keep the city upright in more ways than one. You watch the water disappear into the dry earth, then someone hands you a bamboo stick and says, "Next time, you do the tapping." Just like that, you're part of it. The next morning starts with birds and drums in no particular order. You wake, or at least drift upward toward awareness, to the soft pattering of doves flapping through fig branches, underscored by the rhythmic dun-dun-ka of morning gongs from a nearby temple courtyard. Someone's already sweeping the street with a whisk broom made from palm fronds. The dust rises gently, like incense offered to the day. You yawn and stretch inside your imaginary sleeping mat, then rise to find yourself now in a part of Benin's capital you haven't seen before. Narrow alleys snake between high-walled compounds, each carved with spiralling motifs and symbols you suspect mean something along the lines of, "Please don't pour chamber pots here." Here, the inspection teams are smaller, more specialised. This is the administrative quarter, where policies become scrolls, and scrolls become guidelines, and guidelines become politely enforced norms that somehow determine who gets taxed for a leaky roof, and who gets applauded for building an aerial rain harmonizer. That's a fancy name for a large tilted leaf nailed to a pole, by the way. You're ushered into a small chamber at the edge of the palace district. It's shaded, cool, and full of the dusty scent of crushed kola nut, drying ink, and someone's aggressively overripe banana. 4 elders sit around a low table. Their job? To review disputes. These are the appellate scribes. The final word when someone insists that their rainwater jar was filled purely by ancestral intervention. You sit cross-legged among them, invited as an observer, or possibly as a metaphor. Hard to tell. Today's docket includes a man who claims his roof collected water only because a neighbour's cat frightened a cloud, a widow contesting the shared drainage penalty, since she only benefits emotionally from her niece's garden, a sculptor whose ornamental vases are suspected of moonlighting as cisterns, and a baker whose clay oven dome seems suspiciously efficient at funneling morning dew into a carefully placed bowl. The elders listen with great patience. They chew kola nut. They scribble on wax boards. One of them occasionally falls asleep for a few seconds mid-case, nodding as if in profound agreement. You watch them debate the finer points of runoff. What constitutes intention, one asks. If a pot stands still and catches rain, is that taxation worthy? Another raises an eyebrow, and if the pot dances, everyone chuckles. It's a running joke. Part spiritual riddle, part bureaucratic inside humour. Historians still argue whether these judicial committees wielded actual legal power or acted more as community mediators. The records, mostly oral, with occasional palm scrolls, suggest a hybrid role, part judge, part storyteller, part rain logic philosopher. The widow, by the way, is cleared of all penalties. Emotional benefit is not taxable, declares the eldest scribe, smiling. You drift next into the heart of policy, a long room filled with narrow wooden desks where young apprentices scratch out drafts of seasonal rain tax guidelines. They use sticks dipped in dye made from charcoal and gum. The pages smell smoky and sweet, a bit like burnt sugar. You peer over the shoulder of one diligent writer who's working on a poetic version of next month's regulation. It reads, "Let the first jar be for the household, the second for the neighbours, the third, if hidden, belongs to silence, and the fourth to the shrine. There's something oddly touching about it. Even tax documents here read like lullabies. But not everyone is a fan of the lyricists. In a corner of the room, another scribe mutters under his breath about metaphors and their distractions. He's writing a far more technical version, complete with diagrams and terms like angle of water flux and ritual jar displacement ratio. You respect the hustle. The two factions, let's call them the poets and the engineers, often clash. The poets believe tax codes should make people smile and remember the rain with reverence. The engineers argue that unless you specify the precise number of raindrops per square foot of eave surface, someone will cheat. You ask which side the oba prefers. A clerk leans in conspiratorially. Depends on the weather, he whispers. You move outside again, where several apprentices are practicing jar measurement drills in the courtyard. They carry ladles and bamboo rods and walk around pottery like it's a sacred dance. Each one mutters their practice lines aloud. If the jar is full past the second ring, but not yet touching the lip, and it rains on a festival day, then we do not fine, but sing. It's part memory exercise, part spiritual training. One apprentice, eager and slightly offbeat, knocks over a jar. Water splashes everywhere. Nobody scolds him. Instead, they all laugh and sing. That's a gift to the ancestors. In the distance, you spot the grand reservoir, a wide, stone-lined pool that catches the community's overflow. Here, excess rain is held like a collective sigh, waiting to be released during the dry moons. It's beautiful, peaceful. You imagine a place like this could end wars, or at least arguments about soggy yam storage. There's an official called the Keeper of the Waters. She's an older woman with hair braided into a shape resembling a storm cloud. She carries a staff shaped like a gourd and speaks very little, but her nod is enough to pause conversations. She oversees the ceremonial first dip each month, when water is released from the reservoir for public use. You watch her lean down with a small ladle, stir the pool 3 times, then pour a bit onto a stone slab etched with symbols of fertility, commerce, and wind. Then she looks up, straight at you, and says, "Even the sky needs boundaries." It's a line from one of the older scrolls. You've heard it 3 times today. A boy beside you offers a riddle. If your roof sings during rainfall and your jar listens, who should pay the tribute, the house or the song? You give your best answer. The song should host the feast. He grins. You're officially part of the rain tax law now. As the day fades, the administrative district glows golden. Clay tiles shine like quiet suns. Scrolls are rolled and tucked into shelves carved from Iroko wood. Even the ink smells sleepy. A gentle breeze stirs the air. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a thumb piano, a soft, plucky sound like a cat walking across raindrops. You feel the pull of sleep again. But there's more to explore still. The legal scrolls are only part of the puzzle. You want to find the songs, the ones sung not in courtrooms, but at firesides. The tunes that taught children how to love the rain while still knowing when to share it. You'll follow the sound. You always do. You follow the melody through narrow footpaths that slope gently downward, away from the formal courtyards and back into the neighbourhoods where people live, dream, and quietly complain about their roof leaks. It's dusk now, and the Kingdom of Benin wears the warm colours of evening like a fine wrapper. Gold along the rooftops, dusky blue in the alleys, hints of ochre catching on clay pots and carved lintels. The thumb piano music grows louder as you approach a firelit circle just outside a compound wall. You peek around a painted gatepost. There, a group of women sit on low stools, shelling beans and gossiping in that half-singing, half-laughing cadence that only makes sense when it's been passed down across generations. Children sprawl nearby, pretending not to listen while listening with full-body attention. One of the women is singing. Her voice is steady and soft, more lullaby than anthem. The lyrics sound simple at first, but then you notice the cleverness tucked inside them. If you catch the rain in a bowl too wide, you must share your stew, or else you lied. But if you dance and miss each drop, the gods will bless your leaky top. A girl repeats the verse with an exaggerated pout and everyone laughs. It's clearly an old rule disguised as a bedtime song. Here's the thing. In Benin, rainwater policy doesn't live only in scrolls or bureaucratic minds. It lives in music, in jokes, in riddles. That's how it survives generations of roof repairs, climate shifts, and one particularly greedy goat who once ate a tax notice off a front gate. Historians still argue whether these songs were deliberately crafted by tax officials to ease policy adoption, or if they emerged more organically from people trying to make sense and fun of the rules. Either way, they worked. You remember more from that single verse than from an entire morning spent with scrolls. Someone hands you a small wooden cup of warm palm wine. It smells faintly of yeast and rain. You sip, and the fire crackles. They tell another tale, this one clearly theatrical. An old man with an over-the-top voice takes centre stage. Once, in the season of small mangoes, a boy tied 12 gourds to a chicken and claimed it was his ancestral thunder detector. Everyone chuckles. The boy said the gourds filled only when it rained in secret, so they overtaxed the chicken. More laughter. The chicken refused to pay, so they put her in the royal coop. A woman adds, she laid golden eggs of dew, and they taxed those too. This is how laws turn into law, by laughing at themselves a little. But not all rain songs are jokes. Later that night, as you walk past a low shrine set back under a fig tree, you hear a different kind of singing, slower, haunting. A single voice carries through the humid air, weaving syllables like threads of mist. It's a priestess, alone, eyes closed. Her melody drips slowly, like rain on bronze. Sky gives, earth holds, jar waits, hands fold. If we take too much, the sky grows old. A chill runs lightly across your arms. It's not fear, just awe. You sit on the stone steps nearby, careful not to disturb her. The notes continue, not quite repeating, not quite changing. They seem to shift with your breathing, and it occurs to you this entire system of tax, of tribute, of watching the skies with both gratitude and caution was always about more than water. It was about harmony, balance, a way to dance with nature instead of running from it or fighting it. You remember something one of the engineers said back in the scroll hall? We don't tax the rain, we mark the points where people and weather intersect. Even the rain jar itself, painted, carved, ceremonially placed, is more than storage. It's a symbol of trust. Trust that the rain will come. Trust that neighbours will share. Trust that no one will hoard too much lest the harmony tilt. Some rain songs are for children. Others are for the sky. In the morning you are invited to follow a small group of travelling singers. They visit homes where families have just welcomed new babies. Their job? To sing the rain oath for the child's first week of life. It's not legally binding, but it's taken seriously. The song changes slightly depending on the family trade. For a farmer, you who till the soil and call the flood, catch what you must, but share your mud. For a potter, clay from rain shaped by hand, let no jar take more than land. The baby usually sleeps through it. The parents sometimes cry. You ask how long this tradition's existed. One singer shrugs. Longer than roofs, maybe not as long as rain. You laugh, because what else can you do? As the group prepares to leave, an old woman stops you. She wears a necklace of rainstone beads, fossilized droplets found in riverbeds. She presses one into your palm and says, "We sing because scrolls can burn." That line stays with you. By midday you're standing atop a thatched rooftop watching the clouds gather. A boy beside you says, "The sky has questions again." You nod, not quite knowing what it means, but it feels right. Below, a merchant woman rearranges her wares so the runoff from her awning falls into a neighbour's dry pot. That counts as a communal share. No tax. Across the lane, a clay worker carefully moves her jars into a shaded corner. Not to hide them, but to shield them from overfill. Too much is just as bad as too little, she says, then offers you a roasted yam slice. Somewhere in the distance a drumbeat echoes, low and slow. It's the sound used to announce the start of the rainy season's official observance week, a time of rituals, repairs, and, yes, recounting the funniest tax violations of the past year. There's a performance night for those. You're starting to realise that this rain tax system was never just about economics or control. It was a conversation, a call and response between people, place, and precipitation. And the responses, their songs, jokes, ladled water, and tales whispered under fig trees. The sky doesn't just rain here, it remembers. You wake the next morning to the gentle thud of a gourd being dropped, deliberately, almost reverently, into a hollowed-out basin. The sound echoes, earthy and round, like a drum swallowed by a clay pot. Outside, the light is soft, filtered through damp thatch and woven palm leaves. Rain has come and gone in the night. Not a thunderous downpour, not a dramatic arrival, just a quiet, soaking visit from the sky. Enough to coat everything in a thin, shimmering film of water. You step outside barefoot, and the mud squelches under your heels with a kind of smug satisfaction, as if reminding you who really runs things around here. The air smells of damp wood smoke and cassava leaves. Breakfast, evidently, is steaming somewhere nearby. Today you've been invited to follow a different kind of official. Not a scribe or a singer or a market whisperer, but someone simply called a calmer. They're part of the Ober's Rain Bureau, yes, but not for collecting. Their job is to mediate when things go wrong, and you may be thinking, rainwater disputes. Really? What could possibly go wrong with something as chill as a drizzle? Well, you'd be surprised. Your guide today is a woman named Ide. She walks with the calm of someone who's broken up more than one argument over who filled whose jar when they weren't looking. Her voice is soft but firm, and she carries no weapon, just a carved walking stick with a swirl pattern that, she says, means cloud listening. It's unclear if the stick actually helps her listen to the clouds or if it's just a good story starter. Either way, you respect it. Your first stop is a small neighbourhood compound where a particularly enthusiastic palm wine brewer has been accused of hoarding rainwater under a false shed. The accusation came not from a neighbour, but from a group of school children who peeked through the fence and saw what they described as a suspiciously large puddle in a clay bathtub. Ede asks a few questions, pokes her stick around the edge of the supposed puddle and nods. It's bathwater, fermentation wash, not tax eligible. The children groan. Justice is not always exciting. But not every case is so mild. The second house belongs to a retired bronze caster whose downspout has allegedly been redirected in the night twice to overflow into the common path, turning it into a muddy mess and soaking people's sandals at inconvenient times. You arrive to find an elaborate scene already unfolding. Two neighbours in a semi-standoff, each armed with a mop, standing dramatically on either side of the puddle. Eddie steps between them with the air of someone who's seen worse, someone who once had to intervene when a goat was blamed for overfilling a ceremonial urn. "Let's settle this with the splash jar," she says. And oh yes, the splash jar. You hadn't heard of this one before. It's a dispute ritual, apparently. A painted pot with a wide mouth and a tilted lip. Each neighbour takes a turn pouring a set amount of water into it from their own jar, trying not to spill. The one who spills more owes the other a gourd of cassava paste. It's not about guilt. It's about humility, and it works surprisingly well. You watch the contest unfold. Both neighbours spill roughly the same amount. They laugh, wipe their feet, and the bronze caster agrees to fix his downspout by tomorrow's moonrise. Edda nods in approval. We don't fine for minor mischief. We teach balance. Historians still argue whether the Kingdom of Benin's calmers were closer to judges or therapists. Some describe them as an extension of village elders' councils, while others claim they were an innovation unique to rain policy, an effort to blend spiritual belief with civic management. Either way, they had an oddly high success rate for keeping peace. Maybe it was the stick, maybe it was the cassava paste. Later in the day, you accompany Ide to the central plaza. There's an annual display being assembled, a visual map of rainfall shares from the past season. Not written records, not scrolls, but woven ropes dyed in gradient blues, suspended from the roof of the tax pavilion. Each rope represents a district. The darker the blue, the more rain that district collected. Thin ropes mark individual households that contributed portions back to the communal reservoir. Some ropes are frayed on purpose, to indicate families who gave even when their own jars were only half full. Ede gestures to a knot tied in the middle of one particularly vibrant strand. That's from a family who offered their entire catch to help refill the shrine pots after a dry spell. A small gourd is tied beside it like a medal. It's hard not to be moved by it. You spend an hour just standing there, reading the ropes the way you might read a book. Reins turned into threads, contributions turned into braids, gratitude tied in loops. It's not about punishment, it's about memory. Adi tells you that each season, at the end of the rains, the ropes are ceremonially unstrung, not destroyed, just unwound, cleaned, re-dyed, and started again. It's a metaphor, she says, for how water never ends, only cycles. You wander through the plaza afterward, lost in the gentle, low chatter of market-goers and passing drums. Someone offers you a slice of honeyed yam wrapped in a leaf. You eat it slowly, watching the way people tip water from their jars into flower beds, or let it run across their courtyards to refresh the dust. It seems like everyone knows exactly how much water they need. And when they don't, well, that's what the karmas are for. Your last stop with Ide is a quiet grove outside the city walls, where an elderly man named Orobosa tends what looks like a sacred puddle. It's really a spring, but the way he talks about it, you half expect it to glow. "This is the forgetting pool," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "People come here when they've kept too much," he explains. "When they've held on to more than their share. Not just water, greed, grudges. They pour out what they don't need and the spring forgets." You ask if that's a tax ritual. "No," he smiles. "It's older than tax. It's for people who've already learned the hard way." You sit by the pool for a while, listening to frogs begin their evening chatter. A single drop of water falls from a nearby leaf into the surface. It sends out a ripple, tiny, persistent, soft as a breath. You don't know how long you stay, but when you rise again, you feel lighter. You wake to the low murmur of water moving through stone-lined gutters, like the city itself is quietly breathing beneath you. The rain has passed, leaving the courtyard slick and shining, as if someone polished the entire kingdom overnight. The air is thick and soft, like warm velvet draped across your shoulders, and in the quiet aftermath of the storm you follow a slow procession of water collectors through the outer alleys of Benin City. They walk with purpose but without rush, balancing enormous clay vessels on their heads as casually as someone else might carry a book. They wear tunics dyed in earthy reds and bright yellows, some with small charms dangling from their belts, miniature bronze heads, tiny gongs, or carved tokens shaped like frogs. These aren't just accessories. They're functional, protective, even slightly superstitious. Because when it comes to water in Benin, there's no such thing as just water. Today, you're shadowing them to one of the city's more peculiar and underrated marvels. The official rainwater warehouses, low dome-shaped structures scattered strategically across the districts, like little clay mushrooms rising from the soil. You'd hardly notice them if you weren't looking, yet they've played a quietly vital role in keeping the kingdom well fed, spiritually clean, and, well, very well hydrated for centuries. One such warehouse sits beside a broad public square, shaded by a giant silk cotton tree whose roots look like old, sleepy snakes. You duck your head to enter the cool interior and are instantly enveloped by the soft, loamy scent of stored rain. An aroma you didn't know existed but now feels oddly soothing. It's like petrichor mixed with clay pot and just the faintest ghost of palm wine. Inside, it's dim but welcoming. The thick walls mute the outside world, and what little light filters through is golden and grainy, casting soft shadows across dozens, maybe hundreds, of clay jars. They stand in neat ranks on raised earthen platforms, some painted with faded red ochre swirls, others unadorned but bearing the gentle scrapes of long use. Each jar has a name, not etched in the clay, mind you, Benin's rainkeepers were far too practical for that, but memorised, passed down like a story. A jar might be known as First Thunder of the Wet Season, or Rain That Fell While the Leopard Slept. The names are part weatherlog, part oral poem, and part spiritual calendar. You imagine trying to recite them all and give up somewhere around the splash that scared the goats. One of the rainkeepers, a wiry, bright-eyed elder with a voice like soft gravel, explains how each jar is seasoned before use. You nod along as he describes the old process. The jars are filled and emptied several times over a moon cycle to teach them how to hold the rain. Apparently, if you skip this step, the water turns sour, or worse, forgets how to be generous. Yes, water can forget, he insists, especially if you treat it like a servant instead of a guest. You smile at the phrasing, but there's something disarming about how seriously he means it. And then there's the wax. Each jar is sealed not with a plain lid, but with a circular disc of beeswax mixed with dried palm pulp and crushed river herbs. An oddly fragrant concoction that forms a tight, slightly sweet-smelling cap. According to the rainkeepers, this seal keeps out leaves, bugs and mischievous spirits with names like the Dribbler or Sister Gourd Tipper. The elder winks and whispers, they don't like the smell of bees. You make a mental note to remember that, in case your kitchen ever gets haunted by water spirits. Historians still argue whether this beeswax seal was primarily practical, spiritual, or both. Some suggest it was simply a clever anti-evaporation method. Others believe the herbs had mild antiseptic properties. But the keepers themselves don't bother with the debate. For them, the beeswax is tradition, science, and charm all wrapped into one sticky circle. A little further inside the warehouse you see an elevated shelf for ceremonial jars, larger, more ornate vessels reserved for water used in royal rituals or high-level negotiations. These jars are not rotated with the seasons like the common ones. Instead, they're filled only with the first rain of the year, known as the King's Drop, believed to carry special blessings. That water might sit untouched for months, even years, and when it's finally used, to anoint a new chief, to cleanse a war drum, or to settle a land dispute, it's done with the same reverence you'd reserve for vintage wine or a family heirloom. There's even a story the rainkeeper shares about one jar from centuries ago that supposedly refused to crack even after being dropped during a palace scuffle. They now keep it in the warehouse's innermost chamber, not because they believe it's magical, okay, maybe a little, but because it's become a kind of mascot, a sturdy symbol of Benin's resilience and perhaps its sense of humour. You trail behind a younger apprentice who's in charge of singing the jars, a surprisingly literal practice. Every few days this person moves through the warehouse chanting low, rhythmic songs meant to wake up the water and keep it from going stale. The songs vary from district to district, and some are surprisingly catchy. You catch yourself humming along with a verse about clouds being jealous of puddles. According to tradition, if the jars aren't sung to, the water inside becomes lazy, a term that can mean anything from flavourless to spiritually inert. You're not entirely sure what inert rainwater feels like, but apparently you'd know it if you drank it, and you'd probably apologise. And here comes your favourite part. Some of the warehouses include a listener's bench. It's a small clay seat near the largest jar where people come to sit and, yes, talk to the water. Not just priests or officials either. Regular townsfolk, farmers, merchants, even gossipy aunties with more stories than vegetables. They'll sit and murmur complaints, tell secrets, ask for help. In a world where rulers may not always listen, the jars do. A rainkeeper tells you, half joking, that the jars have probably heard more political plots, love confessions, and business scams than the palace itself. You try sitting there for a moment. It's oddly comforting. The jar doesn't interrupt, doesn't judge, just rests there, cool and ancient, as if absorbing every word into its deep earthen belly. And just as you're starting to think rainwater storage couldn't get any more personal, you learn that these warehouses once served as emergency meeting points during citywide crises. In times of drought or unrest, leaders would gather at specific warehouses to decide how to ration water or settle disputes. The warehouses became neutral ground, places of reason, soaked in the metaphor of shared survival. You don't hoard rain, you distribute it. That was the ethos. Because if the sky gives freely, shouldn't people at least try? Of course, not everything was perfect. There were rainy seasons when the jars overflowed and floodwater ruined a whole harvest. There were also dry years when the jars stood nearly empty and water was taxed so highly you could buy a goat cheaper than a full gourd. But even then, the warehouses remained a symbol of structure, weathered but dignified. People grumbled, sang louder to the jars, added more beeswax and waited for the next king's drop. You emerge into the late afternoon light and glance back at the domed warehouse. Its walls gleam faintly in the sun, as if still damp from memory. Around you, the city is coming alive again. Children running through puddles, someone repairing a gutter with braided reeds, a woman expertly balancing a jar on her head like it's part of her skull. That faint drip, drip, drip you hear? It's not a leak. It's the sound of a civilization that understood rain wasn't just a passing event. It was a gift, a test, and sometimes a personality. You barely notice the slope at first, but as you make your way toward the city's northern ridge, your calves begin whispering complaints. It's a slow incline, steady and deceptive, rising just enough to give your sandals that pleasant foot-moulding ache. Around you, the soundscape changes. Fewer market calls, more wind through bamboo fencing, and the distant, surprisingly cheerful clatter of pottery. This is the artisan quarter, where sound and silence are shaped by human hands. Here clay isn't just scooped up from riverbanks and slapped into jars. It's tested, sung to, debated over, and in a few rare cases cursed at by apprentice potters who forgot to add just enough sand. The Kingdom of Benin was no stranger to bureaucracy, but what you hadn't expected was that even the clay used to make rain jars had its own administrative quirks. You reach the edge of a wide workshop yard, where rows of amphorae sit in the sun like sunbathing hippos. Their surfaces are slick with moisture, not from the sky, but from a paste of fermented palm ash brushed over them with great care. This, a master potter tells you, gives them the patience to wait for rain. He's joking, probably. You settle onto a low bench under a thatched awning, listening as he describes the system behind the jars. Every district in Benin had its own pottery guild. And yes, guilds meant regulations, some funny, some rigid, and some borderline existential. If a pot cracked under too much heat, that was chalked up to the clay not wanting to be useful. But if it cracked twice, well, that was a sign. Time to leave an offering to Ogun, the spirit of iron, who apparently had strong opinions about bad craftsmanship. According to one oral tradition, master potters weren't allowed to build rain jars until they'd successfully crafted 3 ceremonial wine vessels and 1 funerary urn. This, they believed, proved a potter's ability to handle joy, grief, and everyday thirst. What else, after all, is water but a little of all 3? You watch as a younger apprentice lowers a huge clay ring mould into the dirt floor and begins layering it with soft red clay from a nearby bucket. Each turn of his wrist is careful, almost affectionate. His teacher barks corrections between bites of roasted yam, and you can't help but smile. Some relationships really do transcend centuries. As the pot takes shape, the talk turns to something more intricate, the symbolic markings carved into the finished jars. These aren't elaborate carvings, just faint, careful finger grooves around the shoulder and base, some in spirals, others in jagged sunbursts or diagonal lines. One motif, shaped like a row of lopsided fish, allegedly represents rain's hunger. Another is said to be a map of where the clouds sleep, which sounds very romantic until someone admits it's probably just a family crest stylized over generations. Historians still argue whether these markings were purely decorative, meant for clan identification, or part of a low-key ritual calendar. One interpretation even claims the grooves formed a rudimentary script that helped track the harvest cycles, though no one's fully agreed on what the letters say. You imagine it reads something like, "This jar belongs to Auntie Ada. Do not borrow without asking." What's clear, though, is that these jars weren't just containers. They were status symbols, storybooks, weather logs, even heirlooms. When people moved house, they didn't just bring their belongings. They brought their best water jar, sometimes even carried it empty for days, believing the memory of past rains would sweeten the water in its next use. And yes, of course there were taxes involved. You knew we'd get there. Benin's rain tax wasn't just levied on use, it was also applied during production. Potters paid small tributes of clay or completed vessels to the palace, sometimes in the form of communal gifts. One record suggests a royal official once demanded a giant rain urn so large it had to be built in pieces and assembled beside the king's garden like a terracotta spaceship. That particular jar was later struck by lightning and shattered, which the community considered poetic justice, or possibly a sign the jar had been a little too thirsty for its own good. Smaller households had simpler customs. If you couldn't afford a full-size jar, you were allowed to lease one. Yes, lease. Imagine renting a water jar and having a guild scribe note your return date in a neat little scroll. And woe to the person who returned it cracked, mouldy, or cursed. 3 very different levels of problem, in case you're wondering. It wasn't just economics either. These tax structures made sure no single family hoarded too much rain. You couldn't just set out 40 jars in your yard and collect enough for a month. If a district scribe saw you trying that, he might knock, politely, always politely, and say something along the lines of, "That's a lot of jars for someone with only 3 mouths to feed, don't you think?" Some of this sounds invasive by modern standards, but it kept things balanced. It kept neighbours honest. And it created an oddly cosy web of responsibility. Everyone watching everyone else. Not like spies, but like cautious relatives at a family reunion barbecue. And you realise something else too. These tax policies weren't enforced with force. There were no rainwater police. Instead, it was the artisans and water collectors themselves who upheld the system. You mess up, and suddenly your jars don't get sung to anymore. Or you receive the leftover unlucky clay, the kind that made everything smell faintly of wet frog. It's not a fine, exactly, but it's enough to keep you in line. The master potter finishes trimming the base of his latest jar and turns it slowly, admiring the curve like a proud parent. He tells you a final story, soft and slow. Long ago, when the sky forgot to rain for weeks on end, the people of Benin held a rain appeal ceremony. They brought their jars, empty but polished, to the palace square and arranged them in a great spiral. Each family's name was called out, not to shame anyone, but to remind the sky who was waiting. The king himself walked through the spiral, tapping each jar with his staff. Afterward, musicians played soft, drippy tunes. Singers mimicked the sound of water falling on leaves. And at dawn the next morning, clouds gathered like invited guests. The sky apparently remembered. You lean back against a post, the scent of clay dust and fermented palm husks warming your nose. Around you, pots dry. Apprentices hum. A wind picks up and ruffles the papyrus roof. You begin to understand. This wasn't just about taxes or governance. This was about harmony. About a people who understood that even rain needed a good place to land, and someone to listen once it did. You follow a lazy trail through a grove of cola trees, their leaves fanning overhead like gossiping umbrellas. The path dips and curves between root-knotted earth and the sharp smell of moss, and all the while, the hum of distant voices grows stronger, smooth, unhurried, like a conversation halfway between song and rain. You're heading to one of the oldest guild compounds still operating in the city. Not a potter's yard this time, but a weaver's hall. And yes, it matters. Because if rain was measured in jars, it was worn in thread. You're greeted not with words, but with a gesture. Fingers flicked toward the chest, then the sky, then the ground. It's a weaver's blessing, loosely translating to, from sky to hand to soil, may all things return in beauty. And then someone shoves a drink into your hand, which is honestly the best kind of greeting. Here, textiles aren't just fashion. They're weather maps, tax ledgers, and yes, surprisingly precise calendars. You wander past looms the size of dining tables, draped with fibres in dusky golds and berry reds. Each thread has its own weight, its own subtle voice when pulled taut. You run your fingers along a strand of silk dyed with crushed indigo beans and smoked over cola bark. It's smooth, slick, and according to your guide, designed to whisper when it rains. That's not poetic license. Some ceremonial robes were woven to absorb and respond to moisture. When dampened, say, in the fine mist of the harmattan season, the fibres would tighten, darken, or even produce a faint creaking sound, like fabric clearing its throat. The effect was so charming and so expensive that a law had to be passed. Only members of the Ogiami Council could wear rain-reactive cloth in the palace. And wouldn't you know it, rain-reactive fabric meant rain-reactive taxes. Historians still argue whether these levies were symbolic, practical, or simply fashionable excuses to exert control over the elite. One thing is certain, taxes on water didn't just apply to the liquid stuff. They extended to anything that marked its arrival. Buckets, cloaks, floor mats, even the ceremonial fans used by nobles to redirect the first breeze of a new rainy season. Yes, there was literally a tax on waving at the sky. One record tells of a noblewoman who embroidered an entire epic into her shawl, a 5-panel story of how rain learned to dance. The final panel showed a cloud being scolded by a yam farmer, which allegedly caused mild controversy among the elders, who considered it unseasonably cheeky. The shawl was taxed at 3 times the standard rate, not because of the quality of the weaving, but because of the message. You know, just in case the cloud was watching. The tax wasn't always paid in coins or shells either. Some paid in thread, others in performances, and some in something called rain credits, which sounds like a made-up system, but was actually rather elegant. You'd be allotted a number of credits based on your family's historical rainfall average. Yes, they tracked that. And then adjust your water usage accordingly. Use less. Bank the credit. Use more. Prepare to offer up a favour to the community, like hosting a feast or fixing your neighbour's porch. The credits were stamped on pieces of palm parchment, folded into tiny squares, and kept in clay cylinders. Losing them was a tragedy. Forging them, practically unheard of. The local scribes had such distinct handwriting that trying to copy a rain credit was like trying to mimic someone's laugh through a door. But you're not here to scheme, you're here to admire. You sit near the fire pit as weavers gossip and knot patterns into form, and you begin to see how thread becomes a memory. One older woman, whose fingers move faster than your eyes can track, leans in to tell you about her great-aunt, who once made a cloak so beautiful that a passing storm doubled back to get a better look. It rained twice that day, she says. The second time was just for us. Now, whether that story is true or not, you can't say. But the pride in her voice is unmistakable. These aren't just weavers, they're rainkeepers. And rainkeepers, as it turns out, kept excellent archives. Toward the back of the compound is a storage hut where bolts of fabric are stored not for sale but for record. Each piece documents a rainfall event, woven in a special style known as okpon rainu, or listening thread. The idea was simple. The thread told what the skies forgot. Patterns indicated intensity, spacing marked time, and colour shifts hinted at when the rain began to taper. Some scholars believe these textiles helped to create one of the earliest regional rain maps, albeit one you had to wear like a toga to understand. You drape one over your shoulders. It's heavier than you expected, its weight pulling at the back of your neck like a polite suggestion to sit down. You do, and something about the quiet around you deepens, as if the cloth has soaked up not just water, but years. You notice a symbol repeated across the hem, 3 short lines beneath a zigzag. You point to it. That's the symbol for rain withheld, a weaver says. It means the gods were in a mood. She chuckles, but her eyes are serious. That year we sang louder. It wasn't always enough. Sometimes, no matter how beautifully woven, how carefully taxed, the rain simply stayed away. And when that happened, the system didn't collapse, it adapted. Tax debts were forgiven or postponed. Credits were redistributed. Cloth was offered in temple courtyards not as tribute, but as gentle reminders. "We're still here," the thread said. "We're still waiting." The wind rises again, playing a rustling tune through the hanging looms. You think of the master potter's story, the spiral of jars. You think of all the quiet, humming systems people built, not to control the rain, but to welcome it with grace. A system not built on fear, but on preparation, patience, and a surprisingly thorough knowledge of rainfall acoustics. It's almost night now. One of the weavers lights a lantern, casting the room in honey-coloured shadows. The cloth on your shoulders smells faintly of smoked leaves and something else, something older. Rain, maybe, or memory. You stay just a little longer, letting the fabric rest against your spine. The conversation rolls on beside you like low thunder. No one asks you to help, but one of the weavers hands you a thread anyway. "Just hold it," she says, so you do. And the thread holds you too. You wake, not from sleep exactly, but from one of those in-between states where your body is still, your hands vaguely warm from holding something important. The weaver's thread has slid to your lap, but the hum of quiet industry still purrs around you. Someone pours tea in the background. Someone else hums a scale in no particular key. No one says goodbye as you rise, but a small chorus of nods follows you to the threshold. You're marked now, not as a local, but as someone who has listened. Back out on the wide clay street, you notice something strange. There's no dust. It had rained, lightly. Just enough to darken the soil and quiet the leaves. No one scurries for shelter. This was welcome rain. Even the dogs seem unbothered, trotting under the eaves with that peculiar Benin swagger. Half dignity, half casual heresy. You follow one? Because why not? It leads you toward the edge of the market district where the scent of spice gives way to something sweeter. Not sugar, not flowers. Something richer. Fermentation. This is the guild of brewers. And yes, even they had a hand in the water economy. Because while the kingdom may have taxed rainfall with meticulous grace, it also transformed that water into things you could drink, barter, or quite honestly cry into. Rainwater brewing wasn't just practical, it was sacred. The first rain of the season was caught in wide-leaf basins, filtered through charcoal and sand, and stored in dark clay cisterns. Only after resting for a full moon was it deemed worthy of becoming ossuman, a cloudy, tangy beer often spiced with guinea pepper and grated cola root. You probably wouldn't order it at a modern bar, unless that bar had a menu called soothing drinks that might start a time portal. The brewer you meet is barefoot and wears a smock stained in cheerful, unidentifiable colours. He laughs when you mention tax and pulls a narrow scroll from behind a jug. "We pay by season," he says. "More rain, more beer, more tax. Less rain, fewer parties, everyone's sad." Historians still argue whether these brewer taxes were truly enforced or merely ritual performances. In some accounts, the royal court sent out inspectors during peak festival weeks to sample local brews and determine civic merriment levels. If people seemed sufficiently joyous, the brewers paid less. If spirits were low, taxes went up, because apparently sadness was bad for state revenue. There's also an older tradition you hear whispered between two younger apprentices, the rain oath. Once every 3 years, brewers from across the region would gather near the river's bend at night and pour a thimble of first brew back into the soil. Not for gods, they said, for the system. So it doesn't forget us. It sounds absurd, and yet somehow it doesn't. The system had a memory, that much you're sure of now, and the memory wasn't digital or bureaucratic or written in columns and totals. It was ritual, taste, texture, fabric, gesture. It was the smile you gave a brewer when the rain had finally come, and the knowledge that somewhere a weaver was stitching that moment into a sleeve. The brewer invites you to sit, and of course you do. He pours you a shallow gourd's worth of the cloudy brew, then holds his own up to the sky, letting the last drops of rain kiss its rim. For harmony, he says, and drinks. The taste surprises you. Fizzy but earthy, like chewing the memory of a song you haven't heard in years. You feel the warmth slide down your chest, light as laughter, and something shifts. Rain, here, wasn't only a resource, it was personality. When it came early, it was said to be generous. When it overstayed, it was politely asked to leave in temple chants. When it refused to come at all, it wasn't cursed, it was coaxed. You think of modern complaints, droughts as bureaucratic failures, floods as insurance nightmares. And then you picture someone trying to flirt with a thunderstorm through weaving and song. You linger. Of course you do. The bench is dry, the breeze like a sigh through banana trees. Someone is playing a drum softly nearby, not in performance but in idle rhythm, like they're just keeping time with their own thoughts. Maybe you should do that more. Eventually the brewer nods to a scroll on the wall. Rain record, he says. It's a yearly log, handwritten in red ink on palm fibre, but instead of numbers, it's full of small poems and brief stories. One reads, "The morning bird did not sing, but the well filled anyway. Thank you, lazy sky." Another entry simply says, "Rain came at noon. We forgave it." These weren't mere documents. They were reminders that the relationship between people and rain was never strictly transactional. It was emotional. The tax wasn't just a ledger, it was a love letter in reverse. You leave the guild at dusk. Your shadow stretches long across the path, occasionally stepping into puddles before you do. Somewhere in the distance, the soft clang of temple bells marks the transition to night offerings. Time to return. But not before one last detour. You make your way up a low ridge at the western edge of the city, where the sky opens in every direction and the world feels slightly too large for its frame. This is where the royal collectors used to meet at the end of the month. Scrolls tucked under one arm, jugs sealed and labelled. From here, you can almost trace the invisible system beneath your feet. Clay pipes, carved cisterns, woven rituals, fermented prayers, and just like that you understand. The Kingdom of Benin didn't just tax rain because they could. They did it because they understood what rain meant. It was rhythm, resource, reckoning. It required not only gratitude but structure, not fear but care. And yes, sometimes a well-placed ceremonial fine. You sit until the stars emerge, lazy and sure of themselves. Somewhere below, someone pours water into a jug, and a scribe writes a poem on a tax scroll no one will ever read again. But it matters. Of course it does. Because here, in this woven, fermented, softly humming system, even the rain had paperwork. Your breath catches slightly in the night air. The stars are so impossibly steady overhead, they almost seem pinned in place, like decorative beads sewn into the dark fabric of the sky. You shift your weight on the smooth ridgestone and feel the vibration of drums again, gentle, persistent, too faint to be performance, too exact to be an accident, like the earth itself has a pulse. By now, you've begun to sense the unspoken truth of the Kingdom of Benin's bureaucracy. It was deeply emotional. There were no cubicles or clock-ins here. There were moods, celebrations, ancient rivalries between guilds, and a faint but ever-present awareness that everything, from rainfall to taxes, was just one layer in a much older conversation with the land. You stand slowly and begin descending from the ridge, taking a less travelled path between low brush and twisted fig trees. Ahead, torchlight flickers in a tight cluster, and the scent of old smoke and crushed leaves welcomes you toward a courtyard you've not seen before. There's no gate, just an open doorway cut into woven palm fronds. You duck slightly to pass through and realise you've entered tax court. But not the kind you know. No marble, no echoing chambers, no powdered wigs, just a circular space lined with benches, tree trunks smoothed by sitting. At the centre, a fire pit glows quietly. Around it sit 6 elders, each wearing robes of such fine embroidery you can't look too long without feeling like you've stared into a proverb. They glance at you, then return to their discussion. A young woman steps lightly around the fire and offers you a gourd cup. Not beer this time, but water steeped with hibiscus and a hint of ash bark. You sip. It's bitter. Not bad. Just honest. The tax court isn't in session, exactly. It's in debate. Tonight's topic: whether a small farming village to the east, one that had accidentally diverted a stream to irrigate their cassava, should pay extra, be fined, or be rewarded for creative rain storage. The language they use is formal, but threaded with metaphor. One elder says, "When the tortoise builds a boat, do we fear he will sail too far?" Another replies, "Only if he forgets to bring the tide." This is not just about water. It never was. You think back to the brewer's log, the weaver's threads, the gently passive-aggressive market tally stones. These were not taxes in the modern sense. They were acknowledgements, participations. Each one said, "We see you using the gift, and we want to make sure you're doing it with intention." Tax wasn't a punishment. It was a check-in, a woven tap on the shoulder. One elder catches your eye and smiles knowingly, as though he's just read your mind. He reaches behind him and pulls out a bundle of hollow reeds, each painted with a different mark. Water contracts, the woman beside you whispers. Before scrolls, they used these, a reed for each season. You watch as he passes them around the fire, each elder turning the bundles in their fingers, like priests reading a liquid scripture. The debate continues, but softly, almost rhythmically. The circle is working toward something, not against. No one raises their voice. At one point, someone even laughs. Historians still argue whether this judicial system was truly equitable or more ceremonial than functional. Some suggest the elders' robes were colour-coded to indicate bias. Others believe the debates were less about decision-making and more about modelling respectful disagreement for younger generations. In either case, you're struck by one thing: the patience. No rush, no closing hours, no angry gavel slams. Just people trying to listen each other into truth. By midnight, the court has reached a consensus. The cassava flooding villagers will be granted a seasonal exemption, provided they teach 3 other villages how to do the same without disrupting streams. Everyone nods. One elder mutters, "Rain wants to be shared anyway," and the others smile like that's both obvious and revolutionary. You sit a while longer, letting the fire crackle into your sleeves, letting your thoughts settle like dust in a cistern. The court adjourns, not with ceremony, but with yawns and warm goodnights. Someone passes around a basket of dried mango strips. Someone else begins humming. As you stand to go, the elder who smiled at you earlier presses a smooth reed into your palm. It's carved with swirling lines and tiny raindrop etchings. "This was from a dry year," he says, "but we danced anyway." You walk out into the cool night, reed in hand, steps slow and unsure of time. Something soft tugs at your awareness, like the echo of a story that doesn't want to end, but it's okay. You'll return. You always do. There's one last place you've yet to visit, and the stars seem to be pointing you there. You follow a narrow footpath bordered by pressed earth and night-flowering vines, until the smell of incense and wet stone tells you you're close. A temple, not large or gilded, but round, modest, and profoundly old. At its centre, a bowl of water reflects the moon so clearly it looks like it's been captured. Around it, rows of rain sticks lean gently against the wall, still whispering softly from a breeze that isn't quite there. This is the Temple of Rain Memory. Not many come here anymore, you're told by the keeper. An old man wrapped in blue cloth whose voice is so gentle, it sounds like it was poured, not spoken. But when they do, they leave things. Read contracts, dried herbs, sometimes even old ledgers with scribbled marginalia about how much water was collected in year of the crooked yam. You ask if anyone still pays the tax. The man chuckles. Some do, out of nostalgia. Others send poems. You ask if it still matters. He nods. Rain always listens. You kneel at the bowl and place the reed beside it. You think, not of taxation, but of grace, and how strange and beautiful it is that something as fluid and uncontrollable as rain could have once been invited, gently, respectfully, to participate in a shared system. And how, by doing so, it taught everyone else to do the same. You don't remember falling asleep, but at some point the hush of the rain temple wraps itself around you, and the world slows to a hush. When you wake, if this even counts as waking, you're reclining just outside the roundhouse, eyes half closed as morning mist curls like soft fingers around your ankles. Somewhere nearby a rooster is having a mild identity crisis and crowing in 3 different directions. But you're not quite ready to leave. And that's fine, because your final stop lies just beyond the next gentle hill. The storeroom, or rather, the archive of the kingdom's rain receipts. It's not made of paper or stone or bronze, but of cloth. You trudge up the path slowly, every footstep quieted by moss and soaked earth. Overhead, fronds sway like gossiping hands, and just as you crest the hill, it comes into view. A wide, low structure roofed with woven reeds, its walls built not from bricks but from rolls of cloth, stacked and looped like scrolls in a giant's library. Inside, it's cooler than you expect. Light filters in through lattice walls, and the air smells faintly of nutmeg and camphor. The clerk, barefoot with a string of bells around one ankle, offers you a nod and waves you in. You wander between the shelves. Each cloth roll is colour-coded, patterned and tagged with bone tokens. Some are indigo dyed, signifying a flood year. Others are ochre striped for drought. Each one contains records, not written words exactly, but stitched symbols. Rainfall totals, crop tallies, tax contributions, exemptions, pardons, and most curiously, rain rituals. You stop in front of one particular piece. It's a faded bolt of crimson cloth, stitched with what look like dancing fish and weeping clouds. The tag reads, Year of the Drunken Sky. You gently unroll it, and the embroidery unfolds like a sleepy opera. Apparently in that year the rains came too early, flooded the yam storage huts, and caused such a surplus of fermented root that entire neighbourhoods spent 2 weeks mildly buzzed. In gratitude or confusion, the Oba suspended water taxes for the season, citing a rare alignment of spirits and plumbing. You smile, and you wonder, how many kingdoms tax mistakes with forgiveness? How many rulers look at natural chaos and say, you know what, let's just enjoy the rain. You move on. One cloth records a dispute between rival villages over a sacred spring. Another details a year when rainfall was so precise that not a single adjustment was made to tax quotas. The cloth for that year is nearly blank, just a single embroidered raindrop in the centre, like a period at the end of a perfectly quiet sentence. Historians still argue whether these cloth records were mainly ceremonial or served as binding documentation. Some suggest they functioned like medieval notary seals, while others believe they were performance art for ancestors. A few, of course, claim they were simply seasonal storytelling, ways to remember water's mischief. But to you, here, now, they feel alive, like stories that never really stopped happening, like weather made wearable. Outside, the mist has lifted, and the air feels soft like a just-laundered towel. You thank the clerk and step out slowly, the sound of your bell softly trailing behind. Back down the hill, the world is stretching into morning. You pass the Temple of Rain Memory one last time. The reed you placed earlier is gone, replaced by a single white feather. You cross the main road, where porters are already singing about tax returns in metaphors so layered, they might also be about love or fish or the moon. A child runs past, holding a clay pot above her head to catch a stray drizzle. She looks back at you and grins. Your final steps take you to the edge of a low embankment, overlooking the city's outer moat. Once a marvel of engineering, now just a sleepy, frog-filled trench where lilies float like royal confetti. You sit and look out over the rooftops of Benin, tiled with copper, clay, and the occasional goat. Somewhere down there, someone is calculating how many jars of water one household used this week. Somewhere else, an old woman is reminding her grandson that rain always arrives faster when you forget your umbrella. And you're exactly where you need to be, because in this kingdom, taxation was never just a ledger. It was a weather report, a confession, a lullaby, a pact. To share water was to share responsibility, and to be taxed by rain was to admit, to yourself and to the sky, that nothing you have is truly yours alone, and somehow that feels restful. You lean back. The sun peeks through a passing cloud, and the first real warmth of day kisses your forehead. For just a moment you think you hear the rain again, even though the sky is clear, or maybe the cloths are whispering. Either way, you're safe, you're full, you're home. And now that the journey has ended, there's no need to hurry. No need to get up or scroll or check the time. Let the images drift behind your eyes like morning mist over yam fields. Quiet, gentle, familiar. You can still feel the smoothness of the rain reed in your palm, can't you? The way it caught the moonlight just so. You remember the sound of rain sticks in the temple echoing softly like distant applause. The taste of hibiscus water on your tongue. The weight of embroidered cloth between your fingers. Let all those textures settle now. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper into your bed or chair or pillow. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the imagined drip of water from palm leaf eaves. Soft, slow, forgiving. Nothing needs to be solved tonight, nothing taxed, counted, measured. You've wandered through a world that asked for grace instead of greed. A place where even the weather was invited to the discussion. You were heard, you were included, you belonged. And even if you don't remember every word by morning, that's perfectly fine. The story has already settled into your mind like rain into thirsty earth. Quiet, unseen, essential. So close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let the last beads of this tale roll off you like soft rainfall on bronze rooftops.